Bellotti, Brooks Gurnard, and Carol Churko. Next slide. This evening, we will be presenting warrant articles for fiscal year 2018. You should have received a copy of the town warrant in your mailboxes. The town warrant... Okay, sorry. Okay. All right, sorry. All right. Thanks. I'll start again. This evening we will be is that better? Okay. This evening we'll be presenting warrant articles for fiscal year 2018. As I said, you should have received a copy of the town warrant in the U.S. mail. This warrant is also available on the Dover Town website, and we have additional copies in the back of the room. Warrant articles will be voted on at town meeting by the town residents. The town meeting is May 1st, the first Monday of May, at 7 p.m. in the Mudge Auditorium at the middle school. Starting in the fall of 2016 and continuing through last week, the Warrant Committee met with town departments and educational entities as the town revenue expectations and expenditures budgets were developed. The financial amounts we present tonight are preliminary. Final recommended budgets will be provided in the Blue Book, distributed prior to town meeting. While we don't anticipate any major changes, there may be minor ones. The Warrant Committee has not yet voted on any article. We expect to be discussing and voting on articles within the next several weeks. A few comments about tonight's process and protocol. I will review the articles on the warrant, many of which are housekeeping items. I will then identify warrant articles that we will hear further information out through presentations. Tonight is an opportunity for you to ask questions. We will hold all questions till the end of the individual presentation. At that time, we will ask you to please come up to the microphone in the center of the aisle. You will be asked to give your name and address. This meeting is being broadcast and recorded, and we want to ensure that the entire audience can hear you. We expect you to ask clarifying questions on the issues, and perhaps ask the presenter to expand on what's been said. Please remember, this is an open hearing and not a forum to express strong support or disagreement for a particular article. This will be what town meeting is for. And I'm going to ask all attendees tonight to please be respectful of all presenters and people asking questions. Also, we will be limiting all questions and comments to 2 minutes. At 1:30, we will signal and ask you to wrap up. Next slide. Each year, the Warrant Committee issues town departments a guidance letter. In this year's letter, we wrote, the Warrant Committee requested that departments submit level service budgets for fiscal year 18. Any request that was above and beyond level service required a separate request entitled Additional Service Request. This was reviewed by the Warrant Committee. The Warrant Committee has endorsed the Personnel Board's recommendation of a 2.5% general salary increase for non-contract employees. This year's warrant has 31 articles. 18 of them are annual recurring articles. 13 of those have associated expenditures. There are 12 special or non-occurring articles, 2 of which have financial expenditures. Next slide. The recurring articles with associated expenditures or financial implications include Article 3, elected officials' salaries, selectmen, town clerk, etc. Article 4, this is the operating budget, which contains salaries and expenses and is the bulk of the town expenditures. Article 5 is the capital budget. These are items that are for periodic, relatively larger expenditures. Article 6 is to supplement the unemployment compensation fund. Article 7, accumulated sick leave for retiring police officers. This is an item that recurs periodically and is to pay the obligation of accumulated sick leave for retiring police officers. This year, the budgeted amount is $10,000. Article 11, additional funding for the Conservation Commission Trust, a request of $25,000. Articles 13 and 14 relate to the regional schools' capital items. They are essentially the same thing, except Article 13 provides Dover's share be paid for by borrowing, while Article 14 allows Dover to pay out of general funds. We expect Article 13 will be withdrawn as the Dover Board of Selectmen have determined to pay this out of general funds. Article 26 is to fund the reserve fund for fiscal year 18. This annual funding has recently been in the amount of $250,000 and is intended to cover unanticipated, unbudgeted expenses that may arise within the fiscal year. Article 27 is for unpaid bills of a prior year that the town may discover it owes. Article 28 is supplemental appropriations. This is for expenses that arise for the present fiscal year. It is not expected that there will be any at this time. Article 29 is the application of free cash to cover the excess of expenditures over revenues. That number will be recommended at town meeting. Article 30 is for supplements to the stabilization fund. No supplements are recommended at this time. We expect Articles 13, 28, and 30 to be withdrawn. Next slide. The non-recurring articles that will require funding include Article 12, which is the funding of the installation of air conditioning at the Chickering School. We will have a presentation by the Dover School Committee tonight. Article 29 is a citizen's petition regarding a wildlife habitat study along the Bay Colony railbed. The petitioners will be presenting. Some of the routine non-economic articles are Article 1, committee reports in the town annual report. 2, the acceptance of state aid highway funds. Article 9, the authorization of revolving fund account for things like wiring inspector, well permitting, and council on aging activities. Article 31, town ballot for town elections. There are 10 non-routine articles with no associated expenditures. Presentations will be made on these articles. They include Article 10, distribution of the town report. Article 16, amendment of zoning bylaws regarding signage. Article 17, boundary line Highland Cemetery. Article 18, 46 Springdale Avenue property. Article 19, Selectmen's article regarding the MBTA lease. Article 20, Citizens petition regarding the MBTA lease. Next slide. Article 22, pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-throw program for solid waste disposal. Article 23, net metering agreements. Article 24, access of landfill on Hale Reservation. Next slide. We will now begin with Article 4, the overview of the operating budget. This will be followed by Article 4, the capital budget, and then the non-recurring articles. Thank you.
I'm going to take us through Article 4, the operating budget. It's a similar presentation that we make every year. We'll also include an overview of free cash and some words on the operating budget trend between fiscal year 8 and 18. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. For fiscal year 18, we're projecting, based on the numbers that we have, total expenditures of $39 million versus $36,282,000 in fiscal year 17. It's an increase of $2.7 million, or about 7.5%. The operating budget is 36.87 versus 34.999. It's an increase of about 1.875 million, or 5.4%. Next slide. We will also be explaining the total revenues expected, excluding the use of free cash, at 37.4 million versus 36.1 million, an increase of 1.3 million, or 3.5% versus last year. And the use of free cash for fiscal year 18 of currently projected at 1.6 million versus 813,000 last year. It's an increase of about 815,000, or almost double. And this use is basically the minimum amount used to cover the difference between revenues and expenditures. And I'll get to more on that later. Next slide. For fiscal year 18, Article 4, some of the big increases was the category of schools. It's up about $923,000 or 4.3%. And of that, the regional schools operating assessment is up about $625,000, and the Dover school operating is up about $442,000 or 4.5%. Insurance and pensions was also a big increase, had some big increases. Group health insurance is up about $288,000 or 12.6%. Workers' compensation, it's a big jump, not a lot in dollars, but it's up 23%, up $18,000. And also the category of protection of persons and property is up as a category of $135,000 or 4.4%. With the components here, everything is sub $50,000. And North Fork County retirement is up $81,000 or 7.2%. Next slide. There were some decreases. The Dover Regional Schools debt assessment was down about $133,000 or 18.6%. And if you take into account these increases and decreases, it accounts for about 1.3 million of the overall increase, or 1.9 million overall increase in Article 4, or 70%. Next. Also, we've looked at the capital items and special articles in the budget, and Article 5 this year is up about 15.8% or 56,000. The special articles up about 47,000 or 22%. And the special articles other, which is largely the air conditioning proposal for Chickering School, has gone effectively from 179,000 to 691, and we'll get to that later. And this accounts for about 794,000 increase of the overall 2.7 total expenditures increase, or about 29%. So you've got the Article 4 increase, and then you've got the Article 5 capital items and special articles that accounts for the rest, and you get almost the full change. Next. This slide is the pie chart which shows the components of the overall budget, with Article 4, the operating budget accounting for almost 89% of the total of 39 million. Debt service within Article 4 is 5.7%, and the other items are smaller than 2.5%. Next slide. This slide will be familiar to most of you. This shows the revenue sources and the expenditures and how they're tallied up, and then this box shows the amount of free cash that we need to make the two things equal for projected fiscal year 18. And just going through the items here, tax levy is projected to be up about 4.3% or 1.3 million. The debt exclusions are, for Dover, it's moving up by almost $250,000. That's largely due to the debt related to the Springdale property. The regional school is gone down somewhat as well. New growth is projected to be $350,000, which last year we had a pretty good year of $533,000 realized, but this is just projected at $350,000. All the other items are relatively small changes. On the expenditure side, as I mentioned, Article 4 is up about 5.4%, and this here is the special articles of $690,000 and Article 5 of $408,622. Overall, the total expenditures are increasing by 7.5%, while the revenues are a total of 5.7%, and that includes the additional use of free cash that we're currently projecting at 1.6 million of use. Next slide. And these slides are in the back. This is in the back. This is Article 4. Since I've highlighted the big changes, this is available in the back and will also be available on the website. It has all of the individual categories by department of the Article 4 spending, and it's all sort of laid out if you're interested to see it. Next slide. For spending by category within Article 4, the regional schools at 30.5% and the Dover schools at 28% take up the lion's share of the Article 4 spending, followed by insurance and pensions, protective services, general government, and debt service, and then highway and sanitation. And this just gives you a sense of the total pie in terms of spending for Article 4. Next slide. For those who are interested in spending over time, this shows the changes in just a slightly different format over time, the year-to-year increases for each of the categories. Next slide. In terms of estimated revenue, this is a pie chart which shows the breakdown of where those revenues are to come from. The tax levy, as usual, represents the majority of our revenues. Local receipts is about 5.6% estimated. State aid is about 4%. New growth is projected at about 0.9%, and the use of free cash as currently expressed is about 4.2%, with the debt exclusion 4.3%. Next slide. And this shows the history and the increases, the year-to-year increases of those items. And you can see that the tax levy has been going up by about 4.3%, which is essentially the 2.5%, the Proposition 2.5 plus new growth. Next slide. This slide shows in pie chart form the revenues versus expenditures and the amount needed of free cash to plug the gap. And that, again, is the minimum amount to be used. Next slide. This is a slide which shows the history of the use of free cash as a percentage of the total expenses. And so you can see that in recent years, we have, if you could draw a trend line, we've been using less free cash as a percentage of our expenses, but we do jump up some years for various items. But you can see that it's largely in the 4.5% range. Next slide. As I alluded to before, the Warrant Committee is reviewing the level of free cash as we do every year. At the town meeting on May 1st, we expect to present a recommendation regarding the use of free cash, as we do every year. Next slide. This is really just for completeness, but this is the definition of free cash, just to make sure everybody understands what I'm talking about. Essentially, what it is it's remaining unrestricted funds from operations from the previous year, and then it's essentially turnbacks plus free cash from the previous year. The free cash as of July 1, 2016, which is certified by the state for Dover, is $8.1 million, which is, I think, the highest it's been, at least since I've been around. The free cash from the previous year was basically $5.9 million, and the increase in free cash was about $2.3 million, or about 38.5%. Next slide. This slide takes through how, and I apologize for the lack of these numbers lining up, but it takes through how we arrived at the 8.139 million. At town meeting, we started out with 5.8 or 5.9 million of free cash in July of 2015. At the last, that's actually incorrect. That should be ATM 16. At the last town meeting, we used $888,234. There were fiscal year budget turnbacks, that's funds that were unspent by the departments in town, plus also a return of circuit breaker funds from the state, which is sort of it's been in the $1 million range, 900 to $1 million or so. And the rest is unspent town funds from departments. There was also a regional schools fund turnback, which resulted from their excess and deficiency fund, which is essentially their free cash fund in the region that we share with Sherburne. They turned back money to the towns. Nobody can recall it ever happening before, but their excess and deficiency fund sort of reached a maximum, and the decision by the school committee was to turn the funds back to us and to Sherburne, and so that's sort of a one-time increase. There was fiscal year snow and ice deficit of $275,000, which took away a little bit. There were some miscellaneous additions, and there were some excess additional revenues and some other adjustments that added another 1.076 million, which got us to the 8.1 million. Next slide. This is a slide which shows over time the certified free cash balance, and you can see it's now above the 8 million range as of July 2016. But that doesn't account for the funds that were taken out at town meeting in May. Oh, actually, no, it does. I'm sorry, it does take into account. We haven't taken them out yet. Next slide. This is a slide showing the fiscal year budgets, and as you can see, the budgets have grown substantially over time, so that we're just south of $40 million. Next slide. This slide shows the free cash balance as a percentage of the budget, and you can see that the balance of free cash has broken the 20% range. Down here, it was high, but the budgets were much lower, and there was I believe, a big distribution of free cash in these years, 20 years ago or so. So I don't really consider that relevant. The numbers were just a lot less at that time, but it is interesting and informative. Next slide. This slide shows the use of free cash as a percentage of the total available. So the free cash is a certain balance, and then we use some of it at town meeting. And it goes from 2001 to 2016, and it shows that we're sort of using sub 40% of our free cash, and last year it was in the 15% range, leaving a lot of available free cash that's unused, that's not being used for to plug the budget gap. Next slide. And that's the unused free cash, and it just illustrates that next. Just in terms of looking at free cash, to determine and to think about the appropriate level, it would include reviewing the general economic environment and expectations. Are we going to what is the economic environment looking like? Expected future revenue development and expenditure, or do we have big expenditures coming up, or an issue with revenues that's foreseen? what are the needs and wants, the debt capacity of the town, the debt rating, tax rates, comparable towns. There's a preference to avoid overrides to make sure that we don't have to have overrides in order to close our budget gaps if we have them. We'll also look at demographic trends, housing market trends, and other factors. Next slide. Historically, the Warrant Committee has recommended using a prudent amount of free cash. When you look at our town versus other towns in terms of free cash, we have a large free cash balance, but we also have very small, relatively small amounts in our stabilization funds, whereas other towns that you may look at may actually have a lot in stabilization funds. So you need to look at the whole picture, free cash and stabilization funds. Next, our stabilization fund total is about $850,000. Moving on to the budget growth, just a couple of slides that show how the budget's grown in the last 10 years. Next. In fiscal year 08, the operating budget was $26.4 million. We're now looking at $36.9 million, an increase of $10.5 million or 40%. That's an compound annual growth rate of 3.4%. People have looked at the CPI during that period, and annual growth of 1.2 to maybe 1.7 for the Boston area. Also, people have mentioned that the property tax mill rate that we pay in taxes in Dover has grown from $9.20 to $13.05, or a growth rate of 3.6%. There's a lot behind the property tax rate, and so it's not directly comparable, but these are just numbers that we're talking about in terms of growth. Next slide. For at least the last 10 years, the guidance from the Warrant Committee for budgets, town departments, has been level service. Next slide. Looking at the changes between 08 and 18, you can see that the total growth from schools, and this is from schools and insurance and pensions and protection of property, the total increase from between those 2 years accounts for about $8.9 million of the $10.5 million, or 85% of the budget growth. And our operating assessment has gone up at the regional school, and it has also gone up at Chickering as well. Student population during that time has gone down somewhat at Chickering, but I believe it's actually increased at the region during that time. The debt assessment has gone way down as we've been able to finance and also pay off loans. Insurance and pensions is up about $1.9 million, and that's mostly group health and retirement. And the protection category is up about $900,000, or about 40%. Next slide. This is just for completeness to look at the other components. We can skip over this. In conclusion, Blue Books will be sent to households according to the normal schedule. The annual town meeting is Monday, May 1st, 2017 at 7 p.m. and that's it. Thank you.
We'll now take an overview of the Dover School Committee budget.
Good evening. I thought I'd introduce myself first. My name is Lauren Doherty, and I am a member of the Dover School Committee. And I'm here to present to you an overview of the Dover Public Schools operating budget for fiscal year 18. Next slide, please. Just by way of an overview, before I get into the details of the numbers, I thought I would just give you an appreciation that we feel that this fiscal year 18 operating budget is responsible and sustainable and supports the town's stewardship of a learning environment that has consistently delivered measurable learning outcomes that are reported to be among the highest in the state. It is a budget that supports the town's obligation to be compliant with state mandates, for instance, special education. It supports the town's mandate to be compliant with school district policies, for instance, class size, and it supports the town's safekeeping of town facilities and assets. Next slide, please. We approach this budget, fiscal year 18 budget, with an acute appreciation for the town's finances, with an adherence to the Dover Warrant's budget guidelines, and with a desire to provide level services in a landscape with increasing enrollment. This presented budget does not include a few things that I just want to point out at the onset. The health care costs for school employees are not included in our operating budget. This is a line item in the town overall health care cost. It does not include Chapter 70 revenues of approximately $760,000 or the circuit breaker reimbursement, which is expected to be $900,000, and both of these would offset these operating costs to the town taxpayers. It also does not include, because it is the operating budget, the capital requests, which you will hear about later, in the amount of $675,000 for the air conditioning and approximately $33,500 representing both facilities and technology needs that are deemed to be capital. Next slide, please. Now we'll go into the details. I'll start with the bottom line, which is our total operating budget request of $10.4 million. This represents about a 4% increase over last year's appropriations for the fiscal year 17 budget in the amount of $9.9 million. We tend to look at this overall Dover School budget in two pieces. The first and largest piece is the Chickering School budget, which we sometimes can refer to as our in-district budget. I'm going to start with the detailed review of what that budget change of 5.6% is comprised of. And then after that, I'll walk us through the out-of-district budget request, which is relatively unchanged from last year's request in fiscal year 17. Next slide, please. Before I get into the details of our operating budget for the Chickering School, I thought I would walk us through the trends in our enrollment over the last 10 years, which was mentioned earlier that yes, Chickering has seen a decrease in enrollment over the last 10 years. To explain the slide, which is a little bit difficult to read on here, 10 years ago in 2008, there were roughly 580 students in the Chickering building. And they were supported with 30 sections. This had been our historical enrollment, if you will, in the school of approximately 600 students, supported by 30 sections, which is basically 5 classrooms per grade, K through 5. Over the next 8 years or so, there was a decrease in the enrollment, which we saw year by year, and that decrease was managed by similarly bringing down the sections that went along with the enrollment decline. It bottomed out in 2013, I believe that is, or I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading that also. But it bottomed out, you can see, with about 460 students in 23 sections. So we did drop the operating budget by a total of 7 sections to reflect that decrease in enrollment. In the last couple of years, though, we are now seeing the Chickering enrollment increase, and I'll show you what we think, contextually, the reason for that. Last year, in fiscal year 17, we were estimating 450 students with 24 sections. This year, we are estimating 485 students, and we are requesting an additional 2 sections to support those 485 students so that we can be in compliance with policy. Yes, I apologize. Next slide, please. This is a contextual slide to show you what's happening in the real estate marketplace over that same 10-year period. You can see that with the exception of this year, for the past 10 years, there were between 70 to 75 on average house sales a year. Last year in 2016, there were 108 house sales, which represented almost a 40% rise over what we had been experiencing in the last 9 or 10 years. So we have heard through the real estate market that this is a trend that is continuing in 2017, and that's why we feel very comfortable with the estimate for our enrollment next year and the need for 26 sections to support that increased enrollment. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the operating budget for the Chickering School has increased $375,000 or 5.6% over what was requested in fiscal year 17. This slide is sort of for you visual learners, and the next slide is for auditory learners. I'm going to try to combine the two together as I walk you through what the components are of that 5.6% growth in the operating budget. By far and above the other components is our growth in the salary line. This represents about 60% of that variance. It represents a reserve for all salary increases, both contract and non-contract employees. Many of you are aware that the school committee and the town is in negotiation for the next 3-year contract period of the collective bargaining contract with the teacher. And that budget request reflects both that and non-contract related salary increases. After that, we have the next pie, the orange pie, reflects the $50,000 operating increase for the 2 new sections to support the enrollment increase. We have a $32,000 increase in what's needed to deliver the special education to the in-district students. Those are, again, mandated by individual plans that are developed to deliver the curriculum to our students. Next, we have a little less than $30,000 to continue the rollout of our foreign language program in the elementary school. We'll be rolling it into the 4th grade, and it will be our next to last year of the rollout. We're very happy and proud to say that the Spanish curriculum will be integrated for all students next year, with the exception of the 5th grade. We have a provision in here of approximately $22,000 for some curriculum upgrades in the math and the science curricular areas. And we have $18,000 of additional technology replacement requests. This is largely a geography because in the past these requests have gone through capital requests, and there has been a change in the policy for replacements under $10,000 that they being now included in the operating budget. Next slide, please. This is a description for those of you that want to go home and read notes of hopefully what I just gave you for that pie chart. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to draw your attention, please, to the out-of-district number. We are requesting $3.2 million to support our out-of-district requirements. This is relatively unchanged from our request from approximately the same amount of 3.2 last year. Next slide, please. Just to give you the background on special education, the special education is a federally mandated program for students with disabilities from the ages of 3 to 22. Services need to be to meet the legal standard for free and appropriate public education and be provided in the least restricted environment. Our fiscal year 18 budget projects 38 students to be placed out of district, as the district cannot provide the appropriate level of service required for these children's education. It's been mentioned a few times, and I'll mention a few more times, that the circuit breaker reimbursement from the state, it does reimburse a portion of these out-of-district tuition costs, but this reimbursement is not included in the operating budget of the Dover Public Schools. Next slide, please. So the out-of-district is relatively flat to fiscal year 17, but it's really net of two factors which are going in opposite directions. The first factor is the tuition, which is budgeted to decrease a little less than $85,000. This represents, if I can roll forward from where we left off in the fiscal year 17 budget, it provided for 36 students out of district. There were 6 new placements that have either come in fiscal year 17 that were unexpected or are expected to be presented to us next year. And we expect that 4 cases will roll off next year as a result of either children graduating or reaching the maximum age for the school's requirement to provide services to that particular child. Included in the budget is always an assumption for a provision for tuition increases for all of the programs, which is 2%, and that is factored into the overall tuition decline of $83,000. Now, the tuition decline has been offset by an increase in transportation costs of approximately $100,000. This is due to an increase in the ridership and also a change in the mix of where the students are going. Next slide, please. I'd like to just point out several initiatives that the district has put in place over the last 6 years to keep as many students as appropriate and educate them in district. These include the creation of specialized classrooms. In the fiscal year 18 budget, there's a provision to create a new language-based and life skills program at the high school. And if you recall, 2 years ago, there was funding to establish a new integrated pre-K classroom at the Chickering School. Prior to that, our pre-K age 3 to 5-year-old students were outplaced either at Pine Hill, which did have an integrated pre-K program, or other area schools that provided that education to those aged children. In addition, we have engaged a language-based specialist consultant. We have developed response to intervention protocols so that struggling students are identified and supported earlier than in the past. And there is a continual cross-district review, that meaning looking at the services being provided at Chickering, Pine Hill, and the region to identify potential cost sharings and efficiencies within our own district, which legally is 3 different entities. And last time I will mention it, that the circuit breaker reimbursement, again, is not in these numbers. It is a state-mandated reimbursement for cases in excess of approximately $44,000 for the town of Dover. And it's estimated that for the fiscal year 18, that circuit breaker number will approximate $900,000. Next slide, please. So, I invite you to visit the doversherburne.org, the school website, for a copy of this presentation or a complete budget presentation of the fiscal year 18 budget. I know the school committee would like me to thank the town for your continued financial support for educating our students in the town of Dover. Are there any questions?
We're actually going to take them at the end of our...
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So now we'll have the overview of the region budget.
Hello, my name is Lori Crucell, and I am the Vice Chair of the region. Okay, I would like to first thank, in particular, our interim superintendent, Bill McAuliffe, and our interim business manager, Don Vittori, and our Dover, Warrant, and Sherborne Advisory for their Herculean efforts in crafting this budget. So we begin with our mission. Our mission is to inspire, challenge, and support all students as they discover and pursue their full potential. Next slide. Our budgetary focus is to review and revise educational services. We evaluate and maintain the facilities. We remain fiscally responsible and mindful of financial constraints, something we take very seriously. And we must comply with federal and state mandates and fund contractual obligations. Next slide. We received guidance from Dover Warrant for level service funding and from Sherborne Advisory for level funding with a reserve. Next slide. Our budget drivers. Number one, at the region combined with Sherborne, we have relatively stable enrollment for the foreseeable future. There is a slide that will be coming up, and as an example, we have a difference of 9 students from this year to next for the entire region. Number 2, healthcare and related benefits are 50% of the fiscal year 18 increase. And number 3, collective bargaining and contractual obligations. As Lauren mentioned, the region is in negotiations with the teachers union and the 4 other unions right now. Next slide. Our enrollment projections, I don't know if you can read them, but as you can see, it's relatively stable between the middle school and high school, 1173, 1182, 1199, etc. Next slide. We do have some new initiatives at the region, needed educational services to help support all of our children. So the first is a life skills program. Lauren touched on that in her presentation, to support students using an in-district model. So it's a nice opportunity for inclusion in the district, and it will allow 1, if not 2, Dover Sherborne students to return to their home community. Next is a language-based program, and again, Lauren touched on this. We have a program at the middle school and high school, and they share one teacher based on the children's individual education plans. We have a need in the high school to have another teacher so that they're no longer splitting the teacher to fully support the kids. We have a district-wide shared board-certified behavioral analyst position, and at the region we only will have 0.1 teacher time, but this is going to give us the opportunity to have a district-wide model of behavioral services provided rather than 4 separate models, and it will allow us cost savings of not having to have contracted services at the region. And finally, we have a transition program to support student reentry after a prolonged absence, such as concussions, acute psychological issues such as anxiety, depression, this kind of thing. The program is the Bridge for Resilient Youth in Transition, and it's going to provide a dedicated classroom and dedicated staff for academic support, clinical support, care coordination, and family support. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is our budget. Dover's assessment for fiscal year 18 is $11,235,560 for operating, $581,415 for debt, leaving a total of $11,816,976. It's fairly self-explanatory. It is what it is. So, next slide, please. Revenue projections, largely comprised of our town assessments totaling just over $21 million, E&D $137,290. Our revenues, mainly Chapter 70 and Chapter 71 from the state, comprise $2,462,112, And then our revolving account offsets, $330,750. Total projected revenue, $24,105,585. Next slide, please. We also have very generous support from our community that affects our budget. We received over $300,000 from our boosters, the DSEF, FOPA, Positive, PTO, MUD, Needham Bank, and other company and private donations, for which we are so very, very grateful. Next slide, please. And I mentioned to James, if you would like, I can touch on the capital items, and it's Articles 13 and 14, if you want to scroll to that. Okay, so it's, we have Lindquist Common. Lindquist Common, our doors are rusted and need to be replaced. We have the high school locker room lavatory waste. Salt builds up and it's not draining. It's fairly straightforward. It's 1970s, the original plumbing, and so that's a full replacement. We have the EMS, the Energy Management System software. It's a complete replacement of the current system and the associated controls. The current platform does not allow efficient management of the systems and is in need of updating due to age and performance. It's part of a larger project to convert all the campuses onto the same platform so that they can be centrally monitored and allow for better oversight. Our tennis court repair is just mending cracks. We have the VCT, which is a vinyl composite tile replacement for about 10,000 square feet. And then concrete repairs for the handicap ramp that is used daily, and that is required for ADA compliance. The anoxic tank mixers, that's part of our wastewater treatment plant apparatus, and it's at the end of its useful life. And the VFD, the variable frequency drive, it's a pressurization system, and we are moving to synchro flow water booster pump, and we're anticipating some energy savings with that. And then the final capital item is exhaust and ventilation for the air hoods in the science labs. So, thank you again to everybody for all the efforts, and we really appreciate the community's support.
We'll now take questions on Article 4. We'll now take questions on Article 4. Step up to the mic, please.
Jerry Clark, Board of Health. I just wanted to point out that in Article 4, anticipating a question that may come up at town meeting, the Board of Health has two line items that have, one is brand new and the other one has increased. The one that's increased very slightly to some $19,000 deals with the ongoing food waste program. And the other one is a request for $7,500. I'm not sure if I'm going to make a correct statement, but it seems as if the Board of Health is probably the only town committee that collects an enormous amount of paper and has absolutely no computational support, and as a result is a office that is overburdened with handwritten scribbled notes, which make impossible any analysis of what's going on. So the $7,500 is to bring the Board of Health leaping forward into the 1970s. No, it's all hardware. Just to explain, if you go to other towns of comparable size who have the need for the agents to go out and review septic, to review water conditions, to review wells, Many of them have moved to handheld devices, and I don't mean small ones, they may be large ones, they may even be notebooks, because there's a vast array now of applications that are available for that industry so that we can collect data and maintain it. But we don't have any computational device, so there's no place to put any of that. And then the other part would be to provide for this scanning, because all of that paper that we have, A, it's at risk of degradation through either any type of natural event, but B,
30 seconds, please.
to go find it is very difficult. So the intent is to try to scan most of that in and hopefully with some optical character recognition be able to, at least for the better printed ones, collect the data.
Okay, we'll now move on to Article 5, Capital Budget.
Hi, I'm Bob Springett, and the good news is this should end the onslaught of financial information, so you should all be pretty happy about that. So I always like to start by thanking the townspeople, the commissioners, and the various committee members who we work with, from starting in the fall through pretty much December and January, who answer our questions, present information, go back and research a little bit more if they're asked to and that's how we put Article 5 together. So without that help, it would be quite a challenge. Also, this particular year, I have a special thanks for a couple of town departments who, at our request, deferred items that they wanted in fiscal year 18 to later years. I know it wasn't easy, but we definitely appreciate their help with that. And then finally, and reluctantly, I want to compliment members of my own committee who also put in a tremendous amount of time to sit it through meetings, to research items, and to prepare information for the town. So thank you guys. One bit of good news that I've heard recently from Dave Ramsey, it seems that the bathroom renovation work at the Carroll Community Center has come in at about just a little bit less than about $550,000. For those of you with a long-term memory, the original estimate was about $550,000. It was boosted in town meeting for another $100,000 when we were worried about the inflation of subcontractor costs, but fortunately it came in at close to the original estimate, so that was pretty nice. You can go. For fiscal year 18, we reviewed 14 requests from town departments. We also took a look at the Dover School Committee's air conditioning request, and we also looked at the Regional School Committee's capital requests. So for FY18, from you, it's the first column on the left. The green is Article 5, the light blue is the Regional School Committee. And I can tell you that the amount requested for fiscal year 18 for Dover is pretty flat with fiscal year 17. The regional school is up a little bit. So the regional school number that I will be talking about is Dover's allocation of the region's budget, and it's about $206,000 and change. Total for fiscal year 18, I have it $615,000 and change. That's up slightly from fiscal year 17, about $12,000. Talk about scribbled notes. Just a point of reference, over the past 10 years, James was talking about 08 to 18. Now, could you go back, please? The Article 5 has averaged about $450,000. And this year, as in most past years, the requests that we see are generally for routine maintenance and cyclical replacement of equipment and vehicles. Those are replaced in line with sort of the life cycle that we have all agreed to. Looking forward, you can see that in the next couple of years, we'll see an increase in in Dover's Article 5 allocations. So in 19 and 20, the green bar has gone up. In 19, the primary driver is a couple of replacements of 1970s vintage trucks by the Highway Department. That comes up on our board and our projections every number of years. Craig Hughes does never want to get rid of these cars, so it's not clear that that'll actually happen. Fiscal year 20 is really due to a higher than average number of vehicle replacements from Highway and Park and Rec, and there is increased maintenance at the Protective Agencies building and Chickering School. And again, these are all forecasts. In fiscal year 21, the green bar is down a little bit, but again, we're still dealing with higher than average vehicle replacements and maintenance at Chickering. The regional school, the blue bar, is reasonably flat over that period of time. I just made one adjustment to this slide. There is a large expenditure expected, I think it's in fiscal year 20, for roof replacement at the high school, and for sake of presentation purposes, I've moved that into the next slide. So this is a historical presentation of special capital items. And special capital items are generally large items with sort of long replacement cycles. Coincidentally, I also looked at sort of spending over the last several years, and generally, with the exception of fiscal year 19, special capital articles also average at about $450,000 a year. So the special articles and the Article 5 are about $900,000 a year on average. And of the $36 million budget, a relatively small change. Fiscal year 19 is clearly the exception that proves the rule. We have spending projected at about $2.5 million. It covers work at the Carroll Community Center. There's 3 projects that make up that total. One is boiler replacement. I understand one or two of the boilers are having trouble as we speak. Heating and piping control systems, and one of the larger items that come up is full compliance with the American Disability Act. I don't know if I have that right. So boilers are about 5, heating and piping is about $1,250,000, and then the ADA compliance is about $750,000. So that's the broad view. I'm going to just run through the specific requests for Article 5. They're in your packet. Good, Bill. And these are pretty straightforward. A tractor for the Cemetery Commission. This is new for fire and ambulance and off-road rescue vehicle. When they came to us, we sort of scratched our heads about that and asked if there were other ways of dealing with the problem, sharing with perhaps another department. They sort of convinced us, Craig convinced us that they've been seeing an uptick in incidents of people suffering injuries off trails, and this was the easiest and best way to get to them and get them out rapidly. Then we have highway, no requests. They all saved it up for next year. Park and Rec, no requests. Police, replacement of an SUV. By the way, this is a break with the normal 1-2-1 rotation cycle. We've pushed one vehicle out, so it's 1-1-2. Thanks, Chief, for helping us with that. We go then with upgrade departmental servers. It's a 5-year replacement cycle, and they're going to replace 5 defibrillators. I think 4 are replacements that are now currently in cruisers, and they're going to add 1 for the police station, where they've had some incidents with people walking in distress, and seemed to be a good idea to add. Dover School Committee, we sort of went through that, but I will just say there was an request for audio-visual equipment at the cafeteria. That's being funded through donations and gifts, so that was withdrawn. Cafeteria floor tile replacement speaks for itself. Technology hardware, $13,000 for 50 Chromebooks, again, replacements. And so there was an increase in our operating budget for technology. There was a decrease in our capital budget for technology, and they sort of work together. Okay, so I have 2 things I want to talk to you about. There's this green community lighting retrofit project in gold with an asterisk. Did I get it right? Retrofit. And there is an energy audit lighting update from the Board of Selectmen. So these things are sort of related. In the school case, this particular item came up late in the day, and so late that we had actually closed out the capital budget process. So the best way to resolve this particular item was to ask the school committee to put it in their operating budget. Normally, this would have flowed through the capital budget process. But the sum and substance of this item, and as well as the Board of Selectmen item, is we were awarded a grant for about $137,000 for green communities work. And these 2 projects were high priority projects. And if we spend $137,000, and this sort of adds up, we are eligible to then again apply next year for more grant money for other projects. So it just made sense to sort of clump these things together, break the protocol, and stick it in the school committee's budget. We're very thankful. And in each of these things, the projected savings is about $30,000 a year. So you're looking at 2- and 3-year paybacks for these items. Okay, then we go through the rest. Bill, yeah, thanks. So we got painting at the protective agencies, overhead door openers for the fire station. I can't believe no one would think that wouldn't be a good idea. Have to get the trucks out. Air conditioning for the Blue Room at the CCC. We have to replace the wheelchair lift at the townhouse. Am I going too fast? No? Can I tell a couple of jokes? No? Okay. And then we have extension and paving of the dirt parking lot outside the Carroll Community Center. And finally, Whiting Road exterior painting. Dover School Committee, this is the AC request, $675. Henry Spaulding, I think, says he's ready to present on this a little bit later in the evening. He's really anxious to do it. And then if we go to the last one, should be the regional school night. I don't know if it was Article 13 or Article 14. We've gone through the list. And here are the numbers. Dover's allocation of the 364.7 is 56.67%. 206,676 is our bill. There might be a few on the next page, Bill, I'm not sure. And we see the tennis court, the concrete, and the wastewater treatment facility. So that wraps it up for me, folks. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Did I put you to sleep, or was it just so terrific? Thank you very much.
Now hear Article 10, Town Report Distribution. Is anybody here present to speak about Article 10? If you could step to a mic, please.
This was a recommendation from the Town Report Committee, which wanted to have wanted to pursue for saving money and not wasting so much paper, to be able to distribute the town report perhaps electronically, totally electronically, or a mix of hard copy and electronic, but which obviously reduced the cost of the putting out the town report. Right now, town council believe that our current bylaw, people expect to get a hard copy at their homes, but most people throw them out. So I think that we're going to try to find out how many people would really like to have it in hard copy and probably electronically distribute the rest. But that will be up to the Board of Selectmen, and this bylaw change will allow them to make that decision after they survey the town. Thank you.
Any questions? We'll now move on to Article 12, which is funding for installation of air conditioning at the Chickering School.
Thank you. I couldn't wait to get up here, so I told the chairman of the school committee to go take a vacation so I could do this for him. So here I am. Henry Spalding, member of the Dover School Committee, and I'm here to talk about the air conditioning request for the Chickering School. Not a lot of numbers, so the numbers section is over, but there's a fair amount of data, so I can go through this quickly as the presentation is quite lengthy. Great. So we're here today not because of any reason in particular that's happened in the short run. This has been from a fair amount of work from all the people before us in the Dover School Committee, the educators and the parents. So we're just sort of carrying the baton across the goal line. Next slide, please. It's just a quick agenda, give you some background and history, the research that's been conducted, the data that's been gathered, what's been done to now. We've tried a lot of solutions other than putting in an air conditioning, the options that we've considered, and then the options that we've selected. Just a quick history here. The school was built in 2001. The classroom mechanical cooling AC system was talked about being installed, but it was not when the building was finally done. There is air conditioning on the roof for certain rooms. So the computer lab, music room, library, and central offices do have air conditioning. The classrooms and other rooms do not. And there's been really an increase in concern and complaint since 2003 due to excessive heat. The last line, basically, I've changed it to heat-related illnesses have been reported. Next slide, please. Great. So there is a air exchange, but it really just moves the air. It does not cool the building. It cannot be supported even for the air conditioning units in the classroom. The ducts were designed, but they were never constructed, and that's been confirmed by a couple different architects we've spoken to. And the windows that are currently in place do not support cross ventilation, and you also see they don't really support even putting in individual air conditioning units just with the setup of the windows that were built in 2001. At night, the building in the cool summer nights does not cool down. The air exchange does not have much at work there, really just making a difference about even up to 5 degrees, even when we see a temperature at the evening going down about 20 to 25 degrees. So there isn't an opportunity to open the windows and let the fresh air in, like a lot of us New Englanders do before air conditioning. It's not having an impact. And it seems small, but 15 years ago, school was starting after Labor Day. Today, school is starting before Labor Day. So we really looked at two key elements, and that's heat and humidity. The reason that this is important and concerning to us is we want to protect the investments. A lot of these budget items that you've heard about are in our building. We obviously have our children to think about. We have a responsibility to the educators and our staff. And there's also been some scientific research that talks about the negative impact with high heat and high humidity on learning. Just a quick snippet on the research. If you look at temperatures between 81 degrees down to 68 degrees, the impact on reading and comprehension is as much as 30%. If you're looking at temperature change for performance on language tasks, going from 77 degrees even down to 68 degrees, there's another negative impact there as you get warmer. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So scientific research also indicates that 68 is really the ideal temperature. Anything over 77, you start to have an impact. We're not looking to freeze the kids out and get down to 68, but getting close to 77 would be an ideal target for us. So we looked at the temperatures in all the classrooms, recorded them hourly. We looked at the beginning of the school year, so the first, or the last week, which is the first school week in August, and all of September, as well as May and June, and between the hours of 8 and 3. Any data that looked odd, temperature didn't move for an extended period of time, was removed. I will note, I was told we have about 3,500 data elements were recorded and analyzed through this project, so these next slides are very colorful, but we saved you going through all the items. This is just a quick sample of what the colors are going to look like. Anything that's a light colored, gray is okay. Anything that gets up to red is not what we're looking for. So as an example, you'll see the days and the times on the left, and the numbers in the top are the classrooms. And then we also have the high outside temperature and the low outside temperature during those days. So the data was recorded in 2015. This is the first week of school. Never got below 68 degrees, but you can just take a look at the colors and then pay particular attention to the right-hand side of these next few graphs. Those are the classrooms that tend to really feel the impact of the heat. Week 2. This is zooming in on the high point in week 2. These are the classrooms that really get most of the afternoon sun. You look at 2081, never get below 81. Various other classrooms also feel the impact of the heat. Third week of school. Go to the last week of school, please. Thank you. One more. So here are the max temperatures during all those times that we were monitoring the temperatures for all the days. Next one, please. Just another way to look at the data. How many of the classrooms were hotter than 78 in the first 5 weeks of school? You'll see a lot of the spikes there. And as you can probably imagine, those 5 that are at the top, well, guess what? We can go to the next slide. Those are the percentage of classrooms that were hotter. 100% on the top there. Next one, please. Another way to look at it is the percentage of time during the first 5 weeks of school that the classroom was hotter than 78 degrees. So the spikes, if you can't read it in the back, are between 41 and 50%. There are 9 classrooms. Greater than 60%, 7 classrooms. Next slide, please. All right, now we look at humidity. Research says that the ideal range for humidity is between 30 and 50%. Anything in excess of 50% is a health concern for our students and educators. So we were able to monitor the humidity near the air handlers. That's where the indicators that we were able to monitor were, so that's where we get the data from. We looked at it over a 6-week period. This was in 2016. And we checked them every 6 hours. Again, if I remember, the relative humidity recommendation is between 30 and 50%. When we collected this data, 69% of the readings were over 50%. 30% of the readings were over 70%. I mean, I feel like it's warm in here. We could use air conditioning right now. This is just another quick slide. Again, the colors are similar: red, orange, yellow are high. Again, 30 to 50 is ideal. As I scan it, I see a lot of 40s, and everything's above that. 96 at one point. This is the second data point at the other air handler. You can go to the next slide. So we also wanted to survey the community, talk to the educators, talk to the families that have students there, and we got some responses. I have some written responses, but I'm going to save those unless you really want to read them. But of the teachers survey, 37 replied. That represents a little bit over 60% of the teachers, with 14 comments. And then I think what's impressive is you had 68 comments out of the 119 replies from the family members. As we know, those who take the time to write a little bit more information than just check a box care more than some of the other folks. So what have we done so far? We've done a few things. Planted some trees to block the sunshine, tested putting film on the windows to see if that can reduce some of the heat. That's been ineffective. We've lowered the fans to a lower point from the ceiling. We've, in some rooms, purchased larger fans. Those are all relatively ineffective. We've reconditioned the air exchange, make sure that was working properly and that everything was shipshape. Not a very impactful result. And then we ruled out putting portable windows in the AC units. And in the slide coming up, the reason is the windows won't be able to hold the AC units in place. So we also talked to some of the experts, the five people that we looked at for advice from engineers. Next slide. Next slide. Here's another portable AC unit option that the middle school looked at in 2011. They did not go with it. They found it to be too noisy and not ideal for a learning environment. So I mentioned we looked at a few different options. This came out of the engineering reports. There were 4 choices that we considered, and I'll get into each one briefly. One is a fully ducted air conditioning unit with large compressors on the roof of the building, a chilled water system, a direct expansion and a split system, which really has refrigeration units near the exchange ducts, and then a variable flow mini split system, which has mini condensers that are outside the building that can impact 2 classrooms at a time. So why not the AC units near the air handlers? It comes down to a risk of having a lot of moisture and mold. They're a lot less efficient. And the ability to cool the rooms on a room-by-room basis is not available. The fully duct AC solution, which, as you can imagine, was probably the most expensive option, was also looked at. It requires a whole new build of the duct system. It would take a long time to install. It's a lot less efficient than the variable refrigeration option, which, as you can imagine, we might have decided to go with. And of all the engineers we talked to, no one recommended it, and one person even said nobody would choose this option. The third one was the chilled water system. It's even more intrusive than the water chill option, and it's even more expensive than the variable refrigeration option, which comes to the best choice, the variable refrigerant flow split system. It's the most efficient. There's minimal piping, so it's not as intrusive. It's quiet to operate. It has a reasonable cost. Has a nice life cycle. I gather we also, there's a fairly sizable warranty that comes with it, with why it's in warranty and then a maintenance plan. And it's also been used by other schools in the area. Visuals of what we're looking at here. Now a quick update on just the process. So we've had an engineering design study to try to firm up what the cost will be, and we'll get to that in a minute. It was approved by the Dover School Committee, and we funded it through building rental funds and unrestricted gifts, so that's already been taken care of. After the study, we are going to put it out to bid, select the most reasonable option, and then we should have a sharper final number. You've seen 675 for everybody on May 1st. Timeline, we're about halfway through this already. Engineering study, the design study, we've circulated an RFQ. I believe we have proposals in hand, and we've awarded someone to really bid it out for us. I'm getting nods of approval from central office. So we hope to have everything sort of scrubbed by the middle of April, project out to bid in the middle of May, and then if everything goes as we would hope, installation would happen this summer. So we have estimates out. We originally put it as a placeholder when we were building the budget a while ago as $1 million. I think obviously that was aggressive. Dropped that down to already $800,000, which probably in the books that have been circulated. And we expect this to be even lower from there once we get the final bids. And this will come in less than what the middle school spent when they spent $852,000 and change. And we'll have a number for you in May 1st. So in summary, this has been work from a lot of people. I'm the lucky one that gets to stand up here. So there's been a lot of research, a lot of effort, and a lot of work. So thank you to all those folks. The non-AC solutions have not been effective, and we're asking for this project to go through, so we're in line with the students that are in the middle of the high school today. I can stop there.
Questions, please?
Jerry Clark, Board of Health. I, at the request of one of your members, Mr. Adrian Hill, we had a fairly extensive discussion about this, and there's no discussion about the need. It's only the question of the cost estimate and the methodology. The use of the ductwork, of course, is inappropriate unless you were to install usually ductwork as simply a carrier, as a chase, and put in a high-velocity system. And you may want to ask your engineers just to consider a high-velocity system, but you don't have the same room-by-room control. But what I don't see in this, and I mentioned this to Mr. Hill, is that if you're going to put in the mini-splits, right now probably the best unit on the market is the Mitsubishi. And Mitsubishi's single zone are approximately at retail cost about $3,000 for a SEER of 15 to 17, depending upon which model. But I think you'd do far better if you were to look at the up cost of about $300 more and put in heat pumps. For those who don't know it, a heat pump is nothing more than an AC unit that can go in reverse. And the result is that for some of the early fall days and late winter days, you may actually be able to get a considerable cost savings by running the heat pumps.
30 seconds, please.
Okay, on that one. But in terms of total cost, I gave Mr. Adrian Hill a cost estimate, all-inclusive with prevailing wage at about $485.
Okay.
And I've given that to the Warrant.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Since we've already addressed Articles 13 and 14 during the Article 4 and Article 5 discussions, we'll now move on to Article 16, which is zoning bylaws regarding signage.
Thanks. I'm Mark Sarro, Colonial Road and Planning Board Chair. I'll be brief, not even one slide, just a few comments for context on this particular warrant article. This article proposes some changes to the town's sign bylaw. There's a copy of the proposed changes that are shown in red line on the table in the back, along with a one-page memo that summarizes the changes. and there's also a copy in the town clerk's office and on the town website. The sign bylaw is section 18535 of the zoning bylaws. At 1.5 pages long, it's a pretty easy read. It was last amended 10 years ago at the 2007 annual town meeting. And under the bylaw, the planning board issues permits for all signs that are posted in Dover other than traffic signs, signs on town-owned property, and signs in rights-of-way, which the selectmen control. Obviously, the number and nature of signs in town are an important determinant of the town's rural character. The purpose of the bylaw and related regulations is to create functional and attractive signs that enhance the visual environment of the town and discourage visual clutter. The planning board is proposing changes to the current bylaw in response to two things. Primarily a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision, and then also our experience in applying the current sign bylaw over the last 10 years. The starting point for the bylaw, again, was a change brought about by a June 2015 Supreme Court decision in a case called Reed versus Gilbert, Arizona. In that case, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that an Arizona town had violated the First Amendment right to free speech by placing limits on the size of signs in the town according to their content. So in that case, political signs, for example, could be 32 square feet. They were allowed to stay in place for several months, and they were generally unlimited in number. Ideological signs, so signs about an issue as opposed to a candidate, could be 20 square feet. They could stay in place indefinitely, and they were unlimited in number. And finally, signs about events, for example, community events or church events, were limited to 6 square feet, could only be displayed before and after the event, and were limited to 4 per property. To anyone who's actually read our sign bylaw, you know that structure actually sounds very familiar. Our sign bylaw is not content neutral as it currently stands. It specifies different requirements for different types of signs. For example, the lease or sale of a building, so real estate signs, can be up to 12 square feet. Home occupation signs are limited to 4 square feet, and landscape, construction, or maintenance signs are also limited to 4 square feet and can only remain up for 30 days or the duration of the work, whichever is less. And so our bylaw is explicitly content-based. The Gilbert, Arizona bylaw was successfully challenged by a church and its pastor, as I said, as a violation of the First Amendment. While the court was divided on the legal reasoning, it was unanimous in the decision that content-based distinctions in a town's sign bylaw were impermissible. So the bottom line is the Reed decision established that bylaws that regulate the size, location, and number of signs must be content neutral. Ours is not, so in effect it may be unenforceable if push came to shove. So the planning board in this zoning article is proposing to remove the content-based distinctions in the bylaw and replace them with distinctions of other types. For example, in residential districts, the proposed bylaw establishes a uniform maximum size for signs, 9 square feet for temporary signs, 4 square feet for permanent signs, rather than different sizes, as I mentioned earlier, for different types of signs. In the commercial districts in town, the proposed bylaw maintains the current uniform maximum size of 15 square feet per sign, so there's no change in that provision at all. Finally, since we were amending the bylaw in response to the court decision to comply with that decision, the planning board also proposes some changes to remedy other known shortcomings in our bylaw as we've tried to implement it over the years relative to best practices in sign bylaws. So the current proposal specifies that commercial signs must be of a professional quality. It prohibits signs on or above roofs of buildings. It would prohibit the use of day glow or luminescent colors, which are terms used in bylaws in other towns. It limits signs inside of windows to 20% of the size of a window or 10% of the glass area of a door. It would limit freestanding or ground-mounted signs in the commercial districts to 15 square feet, as all other signs are, but also currently in the draft is 5 feet in height. That height might move a little bit. It's still being worked out, but would be 5 or 6 feet in height. The idea would be to avoid very tall signs on large posts. And it also encourages businesses to bring pre-existing non-conforming signs into compliance with these new bylaw provisions as they're updated in the normal course of things. We can't require that, but the bylaw explicitly encourages it for a more uniform, harmonious feel to the signs in town. We held a public hearing on this article in late February. We've discussed it at several planning board meetings, and we'll continue to do that. We're finalizing the bylaw now, subject to any further public feedback and to town council's final review. We will post the final draft of the proposed bylaw well in advance of town meeting. Thanks.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Is there one? Okay. We'll now move on to Article 17, Boundary Line Highland Cemetery.
Good evening, Dave Ramsey, Town Administrator. This involves fixing a boundary line on what I believe is the southern side of the cemetery, between the cemetery and the property currently owned by the Bowles family. The Cemetery Commission in the last year or so has been looking at some aesthetic alterations at that location, and wisely at the time decided they should confirm the boundary line before they went ahead with any work. So they commissioned the Norfolk County Engineering Department to come out and take a look at the boundary. And the short story is that the Engineering Department found that the boundary as recorded at the Registry of Deeds is incorrect. The old boundary, the cemetery being at the top of the slide, is that almost horizontal line before any transactions occurred. What we thought was the current boundary was the bottom line. What the engineering department has discovered is it's the middle line, which is the accurate boundary line for the cemetery. It's a short story. Back in the 80s, the then cemetery commissioners discovered there had been some inadvertent encroachment onto the private property owner's property. They took steps to correct that in an arrangement with the property owner. Consideration was made, and a plan was drawn up, the intent of it, which was to create that middle line. Inexplicably, the plan drawn was an error and created that bottom line. In going back and looking at the field notes of the engineering firm that prepared the plan, the Norfolk County engineers determined that that middle line was in fact what was intended. And in fact, the monumentation on the ground supports the middle line as the boundary line. When the cemetery commissioners back in the 80s executed this transaction, they had no town meeting authority, which they're required to have. So all of that has come to light lately because of our cemetery commissioners' due diligence here. What this article would do was ask the town meeting for proper authority to confirm the conveyance of that middle line where it was intended to be and where the monumentation confirms it to be.
Any questions? Thank you. We'll now move on to Article 18 regarding 46 Springdale Avenue.
Good evening, Candace McCann, Board of Selectmen. I want to thank my committee, my working group. I've been privileged to be working for the balance of this past year with James Stewart from Warrant, with Tim Holliner from Conservation Commission, Mark Sarro and Carol Lisbon from Planning Board, Amy Moot and Tara Nolan from Open Space, Jerry Clark from Board of Health, and Nick Pratt and Jay Boyle, both from Landvest, Charlie Long from Assessors. So I thank you all very much for the work that you've given, the time you've put into this, because what we did, if we could start with slide 1, just a very brief history. This is a context to give you an idea. You're looking at the town to the right, and the large outline of red is the entire property of 46 Springdale. Next slide, please. Just a very brief history. March of 2014, the Snyder family entered into a purchase and sales agreement with Northland Residential to construct 40 townhouses per the state's Chapter 40B laws that permit a developer to bypass most town regulations. The proposed purchase price was $5 $1,550,000. And if you remember, we had first refusal on that price. There was no room for negotiation. So at a special town meeting in September of 2014, the vote was 445 to 16 in favor of Dover's acquisition of 46 Springdale. Next, please. So the next steps were that the town meeting last year voted down the initial proposal which we had made, which was to sell the front parcel and retain the back parcel for municipal purposes. We understood, all of us on the working group understood from the annual town meeting last year, we took away that the people had a strong desire to recover some of the initial investment for the taxpayers and a desire to protect the back property as conservation land, not for municipal purposes, but as conservation land. So we formed the Springdale Working Group. Thank you, Robin, for getting that started in the summertime, and Robin handed it over to me at the end of the summer, and that was how we all got together. We wanted to bring a member from each of the boards and commissions together so that we could get a consensus, that we could get a sense that everyone was on the same page about moving forward with our recommendation for this town meeting. We hired Landvest as our consulting firm to step in with us as real estate consultants to help guide us around some of the options for selling and what the various prices were that we might be able to expect. I'm very tempted to take the time and explain the 6 months' worth of thought and work that went into it, but I don't think that's the best use of our time this evening. Next slide. So what we did was we wanted to consider how much land to sell with the buildings. We heard that for people to be able to use the back land for passive recreation, we needed to provide public access. And so we were trying to work with public access from Springdale, trying to think, would there be another way of doing it from the back trails, but that was problematic. Next slide, please. So the sharing of our work, we narrowed the options to 3, and we presented those to the townspeople at open forum on February 15th, and I hope many of you were here. It was a great open forum. The straw vote that we took confirmed our own conclusion. Next slide, please. Our recommendation as the working group is to sell the front parcel with 2/3 frontage with buildings and non-field acres, the paddock and the ring, and that will be approximately 4.5 acres. To retain the stream to the driveway for a public path and approximately 24 acres in the back of fields and meadowlands and forest for conservation purposes. The parking will be at Channing Pond because Mark was able to share with us that we have bylaws in Dover that say in order to have a single parking space, you have to have greater than 30 acres or 30 acres or larger, I believe, Mark, was what we were saying. So the parking will be at Channing Pond, but access will be fairly straightforward right across Springdale. The estimated market value, according to Landvest, is $1.4 million. It will provide good public access and give the townspeople some financial recovery. Next slide. There you can see what we're proposing. The red around the buildings, the paddocks, and the ring, and takes you, that is the parcel, and then the rest of it will be retained for conservation purposes and passive recreation. And what I wanted to share with you all is that we're using exactly the same language, exactly the same terminology, exactly the same lock-in that we have for Wildwoods and that we have for the Haven Field, meaning it will be for the townspeople to use for passive recreation and be protected as conservation land for conservation purposes. Next slide. Thank you, Charlie. Charlie gave us the deed restrictions. The premises are conveyed subject to the following restrictions. The premises may not be divided. The title to no part of the premises shall be different from any other part. I apologize, the typo, Charlie's mine, not yours. The premises may not be declared as a condominium. The premises may only be used as a single-family residential lot, including present structures and any other ancillary structures associated with normal accessory uses, including agricultural uses, and the premises may not be used for the public sale of goods of any sort. So by putting those deed restrictions on that front lot, we can guarantee that it will stay for single family. Next slide, please. The process to sell will be an RFP. There are specific rules that we will need to follow that apply to municipal property sales. I was comforted to know that the town may reject any and all bids, so it isn't a question of somebody or a group of people lowballing this and that we're obligated in some way to take it. But all of these terms will be able to, will be worked out before the RFP goes out. But with an RFP from a town, there is no negotiation. So it's not as though we can have a discussion of scope of work or people can counter. It's really straightforward that it's, this is what we're offering for sale. Next slide, please. So I wanted to tell you that on the website, we have a potential walk for March 25th, but with the snow cover still on the ground, we're canceling that. We need to have you able to see the walkway that's going to be marked off for everyone to see that passes to the left of the driveway and still is to the right of the brook and the stream. Will give the public access to the back land, and then there will be a right-of-way, a part of the sale of the property for maintenance vehicles for mowing. But that's all been worked out. Landvest's suggestion about that, and Landvest is very hopeful that this property is going to sell and that someone is going to be very fortunate to acquire the property, will be drawn to it knowing that the back is going to be protected for conservation purposes. So we'll plan for our walk that we had scheduled for the 2nd of April. We'd like to set it up for 1 o'clock. If we had some other freak snowstorm or continued to have freezing land and temperatures and that we couldn't actually see the land, if you'll watch the website, we'll probably reschedule that as well. But it's our goal to get you out there as soon as we can for you all to see. We're excited about this and we're eager to take this to town meeting, and we hope that you all support us in feeling that this is the right thing to do for 46 Springdale. Are there any questions? Yes.
Ralph Schlenker, 30 Donnelly Drive. Candace, thank you for your work on this. Could we return to the slide that shows the outline of the 4.5 acres, please?
Yes.
It's about 3 or 4 back, I think.
Right there.
And you have the larger red line that shows the entire parcel.
Correct.
It looks to me like there's a little corridor in the upper left portion there between those 2 red lines.
Yes.
Would you address that, please?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm glad you brought that up. That is a cart path, a very, very old cart path that shows up on the maps that we felt was advantageous to the town of Dover to retain ownership of that cart path, so that there could never ever be a question in the future of that path being used for development further back into the upland area. Thank you.
Rich Forte, 35 Old Farm Road. My question was, with the parking area over at Channing Pond, are there plans or was there discussion about how folks will safely get from the Channing Pond parking lot across the road and down by a sidewalk or some sort of easement to allow safe travel?
It's a good question, Rich. I don't believe that we've taken it that far. I think even in speaking with riders who were concerned about would horses be permitted to come in on this public access, and the answer is yes, they will. They're not at all worried about bringing horses from trailers at Channing Pond across Springdale and down that right side and in. Whether or not we would work with the police chief and see if by chance there should be some sort of a crosswalk or whatever, we could talk about that in the future. We really just mostly want to make sure that we're providing for the townspeople to use this land and at the same time to protect the sanctity of this land as conservation land.
I feel rather foolish since I was involved in all of this. I'm Terry Clark, Board of Health. I was not aware that the warrant would continue to, article would continue to have the old language relative to the septic system.
And you're exactly right. I looked down at that too, Jerry, and I realized that I needed to share with everyone, Landvest has very decidedly advised us that it would be downright foolish to do anything about a septic system. So thank you for bringing that up. I'll share that at town meeting also. We're not doing anything with a septic system.
The point being that there will not be any financial outlay relative
That's right.
to that.
That's exactly right. It's an interesting question, because the reason is because we have no idea what a buyer would intend to do. Would they intend to maintain the house as is? Would they therefore need a septic system that would accommodate the number of bedrooms in that house as is, or would they be doing a different size house?
Just as a matter of law, because I know the question is going to come up at town meeting, the Massachusetts Title V in specific does not obligate the owner or operator of a property with a defective Title V to undertake the repair or replacement of that septic system on a sale. However, there is the requirement that between the buyer and seller there be an understanding of the situation, and the buyer must then make the repairs within a specific period of time.
Good, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that too. Anyone else? No? Thank you all.
At this time, I'd just like to remind everybody of the process. We're about to engage in 3 articles that have similar topics. When you are asking a question, please make sure your questions are regarding the topic of the article that has just been presented. Also, please step to the mic. We'll only be taking questions from the mic. State your name and your address. You'll be given 2 minutes, as Mr. Clark unfortunately experienced. I will announce when you have 30 seconds left. Please direct your questions and comments to the presenter. Please do not engage in dialogue or debate with fellow members of the audience. Thank you. And now we'll move on to Article 19, which is the Selectmen's article regarding a lease with the MBTA.
Good evening. My name is Robin Hunter, and I live at 32 Cedar Hill Road. This evening, not dissimilar from the article that Candace just presented, I am bringing back to all of you another article that was similar to this one that was presented at town meeting. The reason we are presenting Article 19, and what Article 19 does, we can go to the next slide, is basically the vote will be to authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into a rail trail lease with the MBTA. And what this means is the lease will be substantially the form of lease that will be filed with the town clerk. And I will remind everyone, there is a markup on the lease, on the website. There will be, because we are only authorized and because the lease will not be executed at the time of town meeting, the Board of Selectmen may need to further negotiate some of the terms and conditions of the lease. The lease is for the Bay Colony Railroad or right-of-way, and it is specifically to be used as a path for non-motorized transportation. Also in the Warrant article is the authorization for the Board of Selectmen to select gifts or grants for the purposes of building this rail trail, if the vote were to pass. What I would like to do this evening is just give a very high-level summary of some of the changes that the selectmen have requested from the MBTA, and to remind everyone that we are still negotiating with the MBTA, and the terms and conditions that we're presenting this evening have not been finalized. We began this process by starting with a form lease that the MBTA has on their website. We knew from experience that starting with a blank piece of paper, trying to negotiate each and every term of the lease would be a non-starter from the get-go. And so we looked at the MBTA lease, we listened to what was presented at town meeting, to the concerns of citizens, and we tried to address those concerns in the modifications that we are requesting to the lease. We specifically asked for modifications of the business terms, which I'll go into detail next, and then we also attempted to try and mitigate some of the liabilities that we may incur as a town. So first, with respect to the business terms that we negotiated. Next slide, please, Bill. One of the things we heard at town meeting was a desire from the Friends of the Dover Greenway, as well as those members at town meeting, for the Board of Selectmen not to enter into a lease for the full premises, which are from the Medfield border around Hunt Drive to Dedham Street, the bridge that crosses over the Charles River. So one of the things we asked for from the MBTA was we asked for two options on the lease. One was to lease, the primary lease would be from Hunt Drive to the center of town, and then we requested two options. The first option was from Hunt Drive to the Medfield border, and the second option would be from the center of town to the railroad bridge. So far, the MBTA has suggested that they would be willing to enter into such a term, but again, until they give us a lease that we're confident that they've approved all of our modifications, we really don't know. The next item we heard concern about was the 99-year term of the lease. Next slide, Bill. And this is just a graphic of the leased premises. At my last open forum, it was hard for people to really see, and so I do suggest there is a much better graphic on the website, so I do suggest you take a look at that. It's part of the Beals and Thomas feasibility study. I went off track, so next slide. As far as the term goes, again, we heard from town meeting that 99 years was potentially too long of a term. So we asked the MBTA for four extensions on the term. We asked for a 25-year term, a 25-year term, another 25-year term, and then finally a 24-year term. And again, the total is 99 years, but we would have options upon the expiration of each of those terms. Next slide, please. There were also some business elements of the lease that we asked for. Currently, the way the lease is written is the MBTA can remove the rail and keep the revenue, or the town has the option to remove the rail. We asked the MBTA for the option to remove the rails. That way there would be some income coming back to the town that we could use potentially for a perpetual fund or to fund any overruns that might exist. Next slide. One of the open issues that we have, and I talked about this already. See, I keep getting ahead of myself here. So that was one of the open issues, is to see if the MBTA would allow us to use the revenue from the rails. Next slide. The big issue here was to try and determine how best for us to minimize potential liability. So we recognize that there was there is potential liability from third parties. So what would a third party be? It could potentially be a contractor that we've hired to remove the rails or to remove some of the dirt. So what we wanted to make sure of is to remove from the definition of the MBTA, because in the lease, the MBTA is asking for indemnifications, and potentially it includes those types of third parties. So we have asked to exclude third parties from the broad definition of MBTA. Did I get that right? Thank you. Next slide. Also, there is, potential environmental exposure. So if you don't sign a lease, you don't have any exposure. However, if you do sign a lease, there is some unquantifiable exposure, which we're going to try and mitigate by, negotiating terms of the lease that specifically define terms that will be clear, for instance, who the owner-operator of the property is. We will also make sure that there's environmental insurance and that any cleanup or removal of the rails is done in accordance with best management practices, which sometimes you'll see referred to as BMP. There is also an extensive opinion regarding the environmental liability that Town Council wrote for us in April of 2016, and I encourage everyone, if you would like to learn more about it, to go look at that on the website. Next slide. Again, also on the website, there is a lot of information because we've been studying the rail trail for many years now, and so I do suggest that people refresh their memories rather than me spending a lot of time going over everything. But, the Beals and Thomas report does talk about potentially what environmental contaminants may be in the ground. Also, prior to the Beals and Thomas report, there was an extensive report done by the Rail Trail Committee, which is many stacks of paper high and has some very, very good information regarding other rail trails and what we may find there. I think the most important takeaway from all of this is that the prescribed approach for cleaning up a rail bed is a rail trail. So what you're doing is containing any contaminants that may be in the ground. So removing the rails, and then covering that with a layer of stone dust is actually what the DEP recommends as a cleanup for rail trails. Next slide. Again, and I mentioned this a little bit before, so I'm going to go over this quickly, is that we are trying to get clarity in our negotiations with the MBTA on certain terms of the lease. For instance, we want to make sure that the owner-operator is really defined so that our defense in connection with Chapter 21E, which is Superfund, right, is ironclad in the event something were to come up. Next slide. We talked about environmental insurance. 2 years ago, when we stood here, there was a state program to help defray the cost of procuring environmental insurance. That program is no longer in existence. We were also told last year that AIG, which was the largest provider of environmental insurance, was no longer offering this type of insurance. We did, prior to having open forums, go out into the market to see what was available, and we were very pleased to find that there are 4 high-quality insurers that are currently offering environmental insurance. We did get proposals, and the proposals came in between $21,000 and $39,000 for the 5 years for the environmental insurance. So there is a market which we were able to establish. Next slide. If the town were to vote yes and to allow the Board of Selectmen to continue with this project and to authorize us to sign a lease, there is still substantial due diligence that needs to take place. We also will not execute a lease unless all the due diligence comes back clear and that the funds that the Friends of the Dover Greenway are going to raise are in a bank account and are sufficient to cover what a consultant says will cost to build the rail trail. Some of the due diligence that we need to do is we do need to do a title search on the property. There are regulations within the town, such as Conservation Commission regulations, that we will need to vet. And so there is still a lot of work that needs to get done prior to the execution of this lease. Most importantly, we do have to enter into an agreement with the Friends of the Dover Greenway to ensure that we have sufficient funds available for this project, and not only that, that there's a perpetual fund to continue to maintain the property for the 99 years of the lease. Next slide. So the big question is, what is a yes vote? What does it mean? We've said over and over again that the town is just authorizing the Board of Selectmen to continue to negotiate, to perform due diligence, basically to complete our negotiations. And then, only after that, would we execute a lease. When I think about authorization versus execution, coming from the business world, it's not dissimilar to me from the board of directors telling me as management of the company to move forward with a specific deal. When I do that, I'm given parameters by which to negotiate a deal. If I can negotiate the deal within those parameters, management typically signs the deal, executes the deal. If we can't, or if things come up during the time where we were given permission to continue to negotiate, then we don't, and we walk away. So the authorization that we're getting from town meeting, in my simple view of the world, is very similar to what an executive may get from their board of directors. So if the town were to authorize us to sign a lease, we have due diligence to continue to do. If something comes up during that time and the Board of Selectmen believe that it's not in the best interest of the town of Dover to move forward, we wouldn't execute the lease. But again, the execution of the lease that decision will be made by the Board of Selectmen, which consists of 3 individuals. Each of us have a vote, and whatever the majority vote is, that's what will prevail. Next slide. Well, what happens if we say no? Well, the Board of Selectmen is going to stop, due diligence, spending any money. We're done. We don't have permission to enter into the lease. Friends of the Dover Greenway, I believe, said, and I don't know if they're friends here, that they would also just walk away. But I think it's really important for the town to understand that the town of Dover does not have the exclusive right to this rail trail. There has been a precedent set where other nonprofit groups have entered into leases with the MBTA for rail beds, and they have put rail trails in place. The DCR or Bay Colony may decide that they would like to develop a particular rail trail. So I just think it's important that we understand that this evening we're here and we have been talking about the rail trail for many sessions because it's the town that's negotiating with the MBTA. But when we're out of the picture, we're going to have very minimal involvement. And the involvement will be around just the rules, conservation. Another group would have to go through the same committees that we do as a town. I hope this was helpful. It is a very, very high-level summary. We have held some open forums. I have made sure that all information that we have is on the website. I am actually going to work with the town administrator and the town clerk to organize, make it a little easier to get to the information on the website. I will, Madam Chair, should I entertain questions at this point?
That'd be fine. We'll entertain questions now. Mike, please. Please state your name and address.
Jill Seaman, 50 Center Street. Are there any other things that you're waiting on other than just the negotiations themselves? Are there any other studies or committee reports that are still outstanding?
So as of today, there are no committee reports that are outstanding. We are in flux, waiting for the MBTA. We did contact the MBTA earlier in the week because they had promised us that they would have something to us by town meeting, and we were told that they haven't yet reviewed it and they expect to review it sometime in the middle of April. We were hoping to be able to get whatever new information we have out there, but most of the next phases of our due diligence will occur if the town authorizes us to enter into a lease.
And just a follow-up with, if we don't do this, a company such as Eversource or somebody else could come in with the power lines and things like that.
And that's an excellent question, and in my attempt to summarize, I did neglect to mention that even if we enter into the lease with the MBTA has the right to allow a utility company to use a portion of the rail trail for an easement. So that exists regardless of whether, we develop the rail trail or not. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Please step up to the mic.
Ralph Schlenker, 30 Donnelly Drive. I'm wondering what the Board of Selectmen would do at town meeting if you have not heard back at all from the MBTA by that time, or if they have not agreed to any of your mitigation requests.
So I think what I had put in there are no guarantees, and we've said this all along, there are no guarantees that we will have a final lease from the MBTA. We are going to put the form of lease, we're going to file it in the town clerk's office. Part of the Board of Selectmen being authorized to enter into a lease is to allow us or give us some wiggle room with respect to negotiating the final terms and conditions of the lease. At town meeting, we represented to the town that we would deliver the best lease that we could to town at town meeting, and that's what we'll do. If we don't hear back from the MBTA, we will make sure that what we have is transparent and communicated to the town.
Hi, Alan Moss, Haven Street. So just so we're clear, my understanding is for $1 a year, the town could lease this land and control it for the next 99 years and get a free accessible trail. Is that correct?
For $1 a year, they could, but there's a caveat to that. If we enter into a lease, we are responsible for the cleanup, which is the rail trail.
Thank you.
Hi, live in the Haven Terrace.
Could you identify yourself? I hate to be a stickler.
It's okay. I'll be good. Leishka, I live in 9 Haven Terrace.
Okay.
One of the comments that I noticed in the video was that there was for clarification, that a dioxin, which is known as Agent Orange, had a very, very short half-life. But to clarify...
Excuse me, could you clarify what video you were referring to?
There was a month or two ago, there was another meeting, and somebody talked about pollution. And then there's a potential contaminant on the railroad, and one of the major ones is a dioxin. And there was a person who made the statement that it had a very short half-life. And while that is true on the plants, that in-soil half-life of the dioxin is well over 100 years, which will mean when we dig it up, that soil could be kicking around, and that has over 200 years of contaminant built into it. Is that something we've communicated to everyone?
I don't recall this particular meeting that you're referring to.
Okay.
I will say that any remediation that will be performed on the rail trail will be done by environmental professionals who will have insurance policies, and it will have to be done in accordance with best management practices, which dictates how these cleanups are to be performed.
Okay, I just hope that everyone understands half-life is not, of a dioxin, it's not 10 or 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's over 200 years.
Carol Lisbon, 2 Cross Street. I was a member of the Rail Trail Study Committee, and at a previous town meeting, I can't remember which one, somebody brought up the risk of Agent Orange. I spent quite a bit of time talking to various federal agencies, and I was assured at the time that Agent Orange had never been used in Dover or in fact in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Thank you. There being no further questions, I will sit down.
Okay, we'll close that agenda item, and we will move on to, sorry, I have to flip the page, Article 20, which is a citizen's petition to enter into a lease with the MBTA.
Thanks very much. Kevin Van, 7 Pleasant Street, President of the Friends of the Dover Greenway. Before I get started, you may wonder, why do we have a citizen's petition that looks exactly like the article that's been brought by the selectmen? First reason is that when we submitted this, we didn't know what was going to be, what articles would look like. We've kept it there really as a placeholder, with the intention that as long as the selectmen come forward with a motion, take the article, turn it into a motion, that it'd be unnecessary to do this. So just want to level set there. The next piece is, Robin really spoke very nicely to what the nuts and bolts of this. So I'll do my best to kind of go through that quickly and talk a little bit more about the why. So next slide. So the idea here is that we want to repurpose the abandoned MBT railway into a usable corridor and a recreational path. Now I'll mention, before I go forward, that we have over 60 miles of trail in Dover. Many people know that. But not one of those miles is accessible to all of our community. Next slide. So we've already talked about what the lease might look like, how long it'll be. Here are some of the purposes that we have in mind. They're actually, you don't have to go too far away to see what this looks like. In Holliston and in Needham, you'll see similar trails, and you can really get a sense of what it feels like. So let's move forward. Next slide. We've talked about what it looks like in terms of the expanse, the center of town down to Hunt. Next slide. But what I'd like to do is focus a little bit on what we consider to be some of the protections for Dover. First of all, and this is important, and I want to reiterate this will not have any tax implications. The Friends of the Dover Greenway have committed to raising the money not only to realize the conversion of the rail into a trail, but also to maintain it. We intend to limit the scope of this path as we have, so that it doesn't become a draw outside of Dover, and that it really is a Dover event, we call it, something for us. And we think that that'll impact also the volume, that this will largely be for people who live in our town. Third point, prevents the loss of land to other potential leasees. Robin's touched on that. I'll come back to it a little bit later. It allows us to maintain control of this corridor that runs right through our town. Removes rotting, contaminated ties, caps rail, and caps the rail bed. We have over 7,000 creosote ties that run along the rail, and everyone that we've spoken to who is expert in environmental aspects says very clearly that the right thing to do is to remove those creosote ties, to pull up the steel and to cap it. So really to make a rail trail. And then we believe that there are significant protections to Dover in terms of the environmental liability, especially if we were to take out the insurance policy. Next slide. So I've kind of hammered on this and hit on this pretty hard. I won't go any farther. I think there's a lot of information that this, in fact, will not be detrimental to our town at all. Just the opposite. It's the right thing to do if you're concerned about the environment. Not only, but Colonial Water, I just want to point out, routinely monitors the water. They have a well, I believe it's over Knollwood, and have never found any contamination secondary to the rail trail. Next slide. So this is really a trail that we see for everyone. We have worked very hard to listen to Dover, the people who are for it, the people who are against it. And here it might be worthwhile just to give a little bit of history. When we first started this effort, we were talking to the Bay Colony Rail Trail Association, whose vision it was to link Needham, Dover, and Medfield with the rail trail. Many people know that. We quickly understood that that's really not what the town wanted. We understood that the town didn't want to pay for it, the town didn't want it to connect. So we went around about the business of setting up our own 501c3 to make this happen. I mean, that's a lot of steps that we went through to try to make this really an exclusively Dover event. In the budget, we'll have privacy screening, but not only, we're very sensitive to the abutters. We have done as much as we can, we'll do more if we can, to try to engage them and to help them with privacy screening. We also believe that this won't have an impact on the horses, nor will it have an impact on the hunt. And lastly, really, there have been thousands of miles of conversion of rail to trail in this country, and time again, we do not see an increase in crime. We do see an increase in property values. Next slide. Just to give you an idea of the volume kind of coming back, this generated from a rail trail not too far from here in Holliston and Milford, and you can see that with their populations and then our populations, you can see that this is really a low volume trail. Next slide. So there are a lot of benefits here for the residents of Dover. It's accessible for all. We do not have any trails in this town that are accessible to people with disability or people who just physically can't, because of age, whether young or old, use our trail system. The control of the corridor is key. It's been talked about. Economic value is positive, and I've already talked about environment. The last point is the most important point. It's the reason we got together and did this. We thought it would connect our community. We don't want it to do anything other than that. We believe that this will build community, it won't destroy it. Next slide. So if we vote no, I think a lot of people would like for it to mean that it's status quo. Right, and I'll just put a little more information about that last point, loss of control. In Weston, they chose to not convert their rail into a trail. Again, about a 3-mile trail, more or less like ours. And DCR came in, captured that, and is putting in a rail trail, okay? And they're paving it. What's interesting about it is what would have previously been a 3-mile trail for the community now potentially will become a 23-mile trail that connects several towns. Not only, but Sudbury took a pass, and Eversource captured the piece of property. And lastly, it's not up here, but the town of Townsend also took a pass on it, and a not-for-profit, very similar to the Friends of the Dover Greenway, was able to capture the lease and put up a rail trail. Parenthetically, I will say, Robin mentioned this, so I'll say this publicly. We have, as the Friends of the Dover Greenway, really want to see this be a Dover event, so much so that if the town comes out and votes against this on May 1st, we will not enter into negotiations with the MBTA to capture this lease. That's not our vision, and we would at that point disband the Friends of the Dover Greenway. Next slide. Please vote yes on Article 20 on May 1st. Thank you.
Any questions? Please come up to the mic. Please state your name and your address.
You must be new in town. Hi, George Cemento, 42 Powissa Street. These are great people, and it's not enjoyable to be recommending no. I represent the Norfolk Hunt Club. Years ago, I used to ride with them, but now I just enjoy the club. It's been here over 100 years. To begin with, there's not an annual hunt to be protected. The Hunt Club, in order to be qualified as a Hunt Club, in order to maintain the close to 100 acres that's for it in Dover and Dover and Medfield, it needs to have a pack of hounds. A pack of hounds, if you've ever visited us, and it's open. We presently have 42 hounds in the kennels. They are taken out every day, either to the left or the right, along the trail that goes right next to the rails in many cases. Now, these are good hounds, but they are not house dogs. If we have a trail which, for all practical purposes, is full of bicycles, possibly, although I think there's a hope that there'll be a regulation, there won't be dogs on it, people don't pay attention to that. It's going to be a chaotic and unsafe situation from what we can see. The Hunt Club, there are 4 members who are called masters. These are people who ride a lot better than I do, and they're responsible for the safety of the hunt. They have recommended strongly against this. We will be meeting with the Friends later. We also want to meet with all of the local boards just to explain this a bit better, and so that you understand your decision may end up in making the Hunt Club unable to continue. The land that is in trust with the Hunt Club in that event will be developed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andres Rapella, Haven Terrace. I have a question in terms of the points that have been made tonight regarding the span of the proposed rail trail. I believe the town voted last year by a margin in favor of leasing a portion and developing a portion from Hunt Drive to the center of town. It's been stated tonight, and I think at the open forum as well, that the Friends don't intend to make this a multi-town trail. Just wondering, why is the negotiation of the lease inclusive of the entire corridor? And what assurances will the Friends provide or the Selectmen provide that it won't be developed fully, end to end?
Yeah, I feel like that might be more of a question for legal, or, because that was the town who chose to do that.
You can go up to the presentation stand. There you go.
I guess I was not clear, but the town has requested two options. The primary option is from Hunt Drive to the center of town, and then we have requested options to lease an additional amount of the trail. Those additional sections are from Hunt Drive to the Needham border, to the Medfield border, sorry, and then from Center Street to the Needham border. Thank you, Mr. Clark. From the center of town to the Needham, to Center Street. We have, we understand from town meeting that the town preferred that we only develop the section from Hunt Drive to the center of town. So that's the preferred section. We wanted to give the town an option on the other two sections. There is also an option for someone else to lease those other two sections. That option might be available as well if we don't exercise the option on the other two parcels. So I hope that answered your question.
Next question.
Yeah, Lauren Sell, Donald Dredd. Two questions. You mentioned the privacy wall or screen.
Right, so...
what is that? What does it look like?
So we haven't scoped this project yet, and we understand that that's a conversation that we need to have with people along the corridor. So we haven't said there's going to be a fence.
So if there's an abutter who doesn't want the rail trail and would prefer to have privacy screen or a bigger fence or something, I assume that's what it is.
Yeah, so...
They will not be turned down.
So what within reason, because we're not, within reason, when we scope the project, we'd like to work with the butters to either with trees or at times with fences. There are pieces along the trail that are very exposed and are probably best met with a fence. But we haven't scoped any of that. What we've done is allocate budget and talk to some local businesses that are willing to mitigate this problem by making donations that would be earmarked for screening.
So if this proceeds, you would meet with all the abutters?
Yeah, we already have been meeting with the abutters and walking the rail with them and trying to come up with an idea of what it ought to look like. I won't commit to you what it'll look like tonight because we haven't scoped it. But
not all abutters know that things are going on. I'm an abutter, I have no idea.
Okay.
What meetings have taken place?
So we have had more than, I believe, 20 meetings now, some in the homes of abutters or some of the folks here tonight, some of them at the library. We've done our best to try to reach out, but we'll go farther, as I mentioned earlier.
Okay. We don't use the computer that much, but we will use it if that's how we have to. And also, let's say the town votes no, and it ends. What's voting no meaning they don't want the rail trail, but what's to stop them? Because I know what happened in Sudbury and other communities from just taking the lease and owning the land.
What's to stop some other organizations?
So the issue is, if you enter into the lease costs $1. However, you are obligated to remediate, which means you are obligated to spend the $1 million to remove the rails and to put down stone dust. So it was made clear to the town at town meeting 2 years ago that there was no interest to spend taxpayer dollars to do this. So that's as close to an assurance as you can get. So the town, if the town enters into a lease, we have to spend $1 million to clean it up, and we're not going to do that.
If it's not a rail trail?
The rail trail is the remedy. So the MBTA says, we'll allow you, town, to lease the rail bed for $1 a year. But in exchange for entering into that lease, you are required to remove, or to perform the remediation, and the remediation is to remove the rails and to put down some sort of a surface. So in essence, the remediation is a rail trail. So if the town were to enter into the lease, we would have to put a rail trail in there, because we have to spend the money to clean it up.
So if the town decided to spend the money and clean it up and just have conservation land, and that's it, that
Right.
wouldn't happen?
It's earmarked towards a rail trail.
Yeah, it's earmarked towards a rail trail.
By MBTA.
Right.
And I know Needham has many miles, and their rail trail is only, I believe, a mile. It's pretty short, from my understanding. No?
It's not...
Please direct your questions to the
We
presenters.
actually have someone here who could probably speak to that. Mark, why don't you come up and
Identify yourself.
identify yourself?
I'm Mark Healy at Meeting House Hill Road. Like Evan said, I teach in Needham at the middle and high school, and I was originally invested fully in the project that would span all three towns, because I also have a family here in town, and I want to raise my kids to be in the outdoors, and sometimes that means being on the roads or having some safe alternative. So, with respect to the question about Needham, the rail trail is currently just under 2 miles. The selectmen are supporting further development towards the Needham Junction, but currently there's not a parking spot that's been worked out at Needham Junction, so they aren't going to push further to that end to nowhere, basically, unless they know there's an outlet and parking. But it does go to the Needham Town Forest, so you have the crushed stone path, which is a beautiful spot. I encourage everyone to check it out if you're trying to consider what it would look like in Dover. It's fantastic. It is never overcrowded, never trash. It's just beautiful. But anyway, it also gives access to some of their trail networks on the side, and they're looking to push further once they figure out the parking at Needham Junction.
Have we figured out parking?
Yes.
I mean, I was at the meeting last year, so...
Well, there are two studies, actually, that are worth looking into. One is that a group of citizens, led by Carol Lisbon, did a rail trail study. The feasibility study were really those pieces that required expertise around legal, engineering, things that we just didn't have. And so the Friends of the Dover Greenway raised the funds, donated it to the town, who then commissioned the study. So there are two studies, one done by the Rail Trail Committee and a second one done by Beals and Thomas.
This information is available online. It is also available in hard copy at the library, both reports.
And what's to stop us from stopping the rail trail from before the Hunt Club, so the Hunt Club doesn't have a problem?
Well, we believe that the making of a rail trail will not in any way interfere with the Hunt Club. We are meeting with them, I believe it's on April 11th, to discuss that very thing. As I've mentioned before, I'm not aware of a Hunt Club that has been forced to disband because of something similar, and I'm sure that we can share this land with the Hunt Club. Like we've done so many times before, the Hunt uses land owned by the Dover Land Conservation Trust and land owned by the town. We've been generous enough to share with the Hunt. We'd love to share this with the Hunt as well.
And one more thing. If this goes just a small portion and not the A or B or C, from what happens to those people on Haven Terrace or the rest of Donnelly, where it could be bought up by somebody else?
Well, our hope is that this remains a Dover event, but should the town decide not to vote in favor of this Article 19 or 20, it's possible that
That's the
another...
parameters where it's going to stop. I mean, you have to have the whole...
I don't believe that any of the groups presented tonight could speak to what would happen if a third party or an outside party from Dover took the trail.
But I think, if I understand the options, what's happened is that the Board of Selectmen have set up a scenario whereby we don't have to go through a bunch of negotiations, and we could exercise those options if the town chose to do that.
You would have the first option.
That I don't know. Do we have first right of refusal? Is it legal? That's a legal question, yeah. Do we...
Okay. And we're going to, after this answer, turn the questions back over to the rest of the audience.
Steve Anderson, the person with the voice problem, so bear with me. The purpose of the options is to allow the town, should it vote to do so, to essentially lock up the entire corridor from Medfield to just this side of the bridge. It, under no circumstances, will go as far as the Charles River Bridge. Okay? The least premises is the stretch from Hunt to the town center. Locking up the options on either side in the lease means anyone else that's going to try to take those sections will know from a recorded notice of lease that the town has the option at any time in the 99 years to take it out from under the person that's trying to step in and take it over. One would say having your cake and eating it too. You have the section that you're looking to lease, and that becomes the rail trail. You have the option in the other two sections to give you local control.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
I haven't heard anything about cost, and I wonder if you...
Name and address, please. We are...
Tom Crowley, Cedar Hill Road. I haven't heard anything about cost, either from this gentleman or from you people. If they walk, are we stuck? And how much will it cost? Has the town investigated what the potential cost will be? And I'd like you to tell us how much you've raised and how much you've spent. Thank you very much.
I mean, should I... The funds need to be raised before the town will proceed. And they need to be in the bank, so that was mentioned earlier, and it's very clear. You asked how much we intend for that to be. There's a range, anywhere from, I believe it was $850,000, $900,000, up to $1.2 million for the entire expanse of the corridor, but we're doing only a portion of it. So we've chosen $1 million, and of that we have raised over $200,000 so far. We've done that despite the fact the town has not voted in favor of the rail trail. We've done that through pledges. So our feeling is that we will be able to raise that money. Should the funds not be raised, my understanding is then that you're in default on the lease, and it reverts back to as it was previously. Am I wrong about that? Yeah, I see a head shaking.
Jerry?
I think it was rather clear.
Mr. Clerk, just to clarify, the selectmen have said, represented time and time again, that we will not execute a lease until we have all the funds in the bank. What we will do is enter into a license with the MBTA to allow us to do further due diligence, which will then allow us to determine the exact cost, or as close as we can get to the cost to construct the rail trail, and that way allow for Friends of the Dover Greenway to raise the funds that are necessary. The lease will not be executed unless all the funds are in the bank.
Tom Crowley, Cedar Hill Road. I haven't seen any numbers, and I'm counting on you people to find out what the numbers really are. Otherwise, we've got the cart before the horse. Thank you.
No, thank you. The numbers are in the study, Mr. Crowley.
Hi, Jane Hauser, 22 Rolling Lane. I'm just curious if you can give us a timeline for this. Obviously, it's going to town meeting, but I think I was here last week when they did give numbers, and we have, I mean, it's like deja vu all over again here. And I know that there are questions, and I know that they're on the website, but I'm just curious, you've talked about what would happen if this doesn't go forward, that the Friends would dissolve, but what happens if it does? What can we look forward to if this does pass? And when?
So, okay, if it does pass, there's a process that we need to undertake. So, the first step in the process is to complete the due diligence, which includes title searches, making sure we get design drawings to spec out exactly how much the rail trail is going to cost. That will take somewhere between 6 and 12 months. And then it's another between 6 and 12 months to actually construct the rail trail. So you're talking somewhere between 18 months to 2 years.
And this town meeting is the final that goes on to the selectmen to decide.
So what the town meeting is going to do, and I hate to harp on this, the town meeting is going to authorize the selectmen either to enter into the lease or not. Okay?
Thank you.
This will be the last question regarding this article.
My name is Allison Galley. I live at 14 Tower Drive. The Hunt Club I'm new, and the Hunt Club's been brought up. How many members are in the Hunt Club, or what percentage of the town are members of the Hunt Club?
I can answer that question. I'm not sure if my facts are exactly correct, but from what I've been able to gather is that approximately 10% of the Hunt Club members are Dover residents. So approximately 19 people, but again, my numbers I'm not sure how accurate my numbers are. I would also like to point out that 50 acres of the land is in Medfield and 50 acres of the land is in Dover. And Medfield has indicated that they are interested moving forward with the rail trail. So I don't know how Medfield's rail trail potentially impacts the Hunt Club.
Okay. At this point, we're going to move on to Article 21, which is a citizen's petition for a wildlife habitat study on the Bay Colony Rail Trail, or rail bed, sorry. If you could just identify yourself, please. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ted Sullivan. I live at 198 Center Street. I'm getting over a cold, so if you can't hear me, please let me know. I'm here to introduce and to speak about Article 21, which is a citizen petition for the Wildlife Habitat and Biodiversity Study request. This was recommended by the Dover Master Plan of 2012. Such a study to focus on the effects of to do a biodiversity study and a habitat study for the whole town. And what we'd like this to be done, and what this article is for, is to go review the land along the proposed rail trail through Dover. What does this article mean? It asks the town to study the natural resources, natural resources of the area adjacent to the rail bed prior to authorizing any disturbance of the land. Next slide, please. The Dover 2012 Master Plan talked about favoring wildlife corridors and areas helping to sustain ecological balance and biological diversity, encourages the town to create an ecosystem map of Dover and the census of species diversity, and recommends that the town to develop and implement strategies of habitat management to increase long-term biodiversity. Next slide, please. This is the little map right here. It might be better if you want to look at it later to get more clarity. It's also, this will be posted on the town's website. This is from the UMass Extension Center for Agriculture in November of 2011. It identifies habitat of potential and statewide importance. And if you look, the rail bed goes directly through a large area of habitat, the important wildlife area. So you can see Springdale and Hunt Drive, Springdale to the north, and then to the south is through Hunt Drive. So why is this important? The existing biomaps are out of date. Concom and Ecotech, which is another ecological firm, walked the rail bed in July 2012 during the summer conditions and found a number of wetland resource areas. The Beals and Thomas also walked the rail bed in July 2015 and indicated more extensive wetlands. It's important to note that we have to do a study over 4 seasons to understand the environmental impact. And the wildlife habitat and biodiversity have not been studied yet, although it was called for in the Dover 2012 Master Plan. The Center Street Conservation Corridor from Springdale Avenue to Hunt Drive represents the largest area of unfragmented open space in the town, over 800 acres. Wildwoods and the surrounding conservation land functions as a critical wildlife corridor. It has been identified as an area supporting regionally rare species, and this is from the Trust for Public Lands. The 46 Springdale study that was done, which was a very good study, if you haven't seen it, please take a look at it, identified the forested land next to the rail bed and as a significant wildlife corridor. Next slide, please. So what we'd like to recommend is that we do a study before signing. Article 21 provides critical information before disturbing our important conservation land. The study would create a baseline of natural resources and identify the impact of development on wildlife. This should be done before the town surveys the land and cuts down any trees to do any surveying, because once destroyed, biodiversity and habitat rarely recover. Next slide, please. Please remember that open space efforts to protect wildlife are not always compatible with recreation. I'm sure some of you may have seen in March of 2016, there's a bobcat seen on the Sherborne line. Pictures on the right show the Needham Rail Trail construction. And so what I'd like to do right now is introduce Mr. Rick Vanderpool. He's from Ecosystems Management Consultants of New England. He has nearly 30 years and has surveyed and done assessments of over 300,000 acres of private and public land in New England. He's a certified wetland scientist, past chair of the New Hampshire Joint Board of Natural Scientists, and current chair of the government-appointed Site Selection Committee for the Aquatic Resources Mitigation. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks Ted. Rick Vanderpool, Sandwich, New Hampshire. Appreciate your time and attention. First slide, please, Bill. I was asked by the Be True to Dover group to weigh in on the potential for fragmentation along a railroad stretch. As you all are familiar, 3.6 miles running from Needham to Medfield. I have worked with Susan Morse and a number of other wildlife biologists in assessing the potential impacts along existing wildlife corridors. What I'm primarily here tonight to do is to provide you with a brief explanation as to why this should be a concern to the residents of Dover. As Ted indicated, the habitat has not really been studied in this unfragmented area of over 850 acres. and yet it contains one of the core habitats for the town. Biomap 2, which indicates that there is in Noanet area a core habitat and critical landscape area, didn't recognize the fact that this unfragmented site also has extremely high wildlife value. Next slide, please. As Ted indicated, there is this core area which currently shows the rail trail cutting it off, and yet, as all of you know who have been there recently, it has begun to overgrow. It's pretty rare, given 150 plus years of history of use, to see something like this be deconstructed, as it were, in a way that has allowed, from my observations the other day, a number of wildlife species to regain their natural population habits and dispersing. Next slide, please. The Trout Brook watershed is one area that also has high value for downstream residents, wildlife, and human alike. It's unusual to have most of an upper watershed be contained within conservation lands, whether with that specific purpose or those that are used currently for recreational purpose, in this case the hunt club. If you notice on the map, you have a number of aquifers downstream, right below Channing Pond and the Trout Brook that feeds into it. Here we have another opportunity to minimize our impacts by retaining the integrity of the upper watershed. Next slide, please. This map shows the conservation lands in the town, and pointing again to a fair amount of contiguous land within this unfragmented area that still has a tremendous value for a number of wildlife species. The Wildwoods directly connects with at least 8 other parcels, and of course is consistent with the open space goals of the town as stated in the master plan. Next slide, please. During the single survey that we did the other day, we found that there were a number of water bodies, in fact a number of wetlands that were not mapped on any map, and I would estimate at least twice as many as those that are recorded in this map showing where existing wetlands are in this vicinity, some of which clearly have the potential to support spotted salamander, among others, as well as some special concern species, the Jefferson complex salamander and the blue spotted salamander, both of which are listed by the state as being of greatest conservation concern. Principal to the fragmentation effects of dogs, walkers, bikers, non-motorized, recreationists, but certainly the numbers that could occur along a packed rail trail. We have to look at some of the basic principles of wildlife habitat use by a number of species. Increases in edge will naturally occur as a result of the rail trail. There will likely be an increase in predation by, in this case, dogs, perhaps cats. There will also be some direct mortality to the smaller critters like these guys. But perhaps most importantly, wildlife populations tend to change their behavior when they're presented with fragmenting effects. And that's something we don't necessarily pay attention to until it's a problem. Not that you have a tremendous amount of bear problems in Dover, but where I come from, that's probably 90% of what our fish and game officers end up doing is moving bears someplace else because there's too much available garbage and roadside, material. There's also a retreat from preferred feeding areas. The deterrence effect was, I think, pretty well stated by Fisheries and Wildlife in their wildlife trail guidelines. Mass Wildlife is aware of the rapidly growing public demand for outdoor recreational activities. In Mass Wildlife's experience, marked recreational trails do not advance and in most cases directly conflict with Mass Wildlife statutory mandates. For example, recreational trails have been shown to fragment and degrade habitat, disrupt wildlife, and compromise biodiversity. The secondary impacts are significant as well. So it boils down to asking the question whether or not this potentially well-used recreational trail outweighs the benefits of having a core habitat that was specifically protected to provide that area as an intact area. And that's really what it boils down to. And I would posit from a wildlife biologist standpoint that it may not. And you really need to ask yourself what you're gaining from it and what you're losing from it. There may be other alternatives, and that's another question I would ask. Next slide, please. These are just some of the species of concern, and I'll go through them fairly quickly. Next slide. You can run through these species, each of which have their own response to differing fragmenting effects. Each of them have different responses to potential trail activities. This study that I did in New Hampshire points to the number of track intercepts along track transects I ran for 2 winters, where off-trail track frequencies are represented in blue, along or within 100 meters of a foot trail in red, and then along snowmobile trails in yellow. And you'll note that when it comes to the actively used trails, there's quite a few less intercepts, with the exception of things like gray squirrel and deer, which we know are pretty tolerant of fragmenting effects. So it's the other species that we're looking at that are clearly deterred by those types of activities. Next slide, please. So just as a wrap-up, like I said, the main question, is this worth the sort of gamble that you might have relative to fragmenting this particular habitat area? And are there alternatives? What is, in fact, for the greater good of Dover? One way to find out, without having a clear answer, is to perform the necessary baseline study to do that. And that's what I've been asked to propose to the town, and that's what Article 21 is all about. I thank you for your attention.
Any questions on Article 21 only? No.
Alan Moss, Haven Street. Thank you for your talk. I'm delighted to see Be True to Dover now an environmental organization and not an anti-rail trail organization. So my bigger question is, as you know, the alternative here is to not lease this and have Eversource lease it and put down a 16-foot wide corridor that's paved and potentially power lines. What would the impact, could that be on the habitat also?
Assuming that they would have that lease and develop an infrastructure like that, clearly it would have a fragmenting effect on a number of species. Interestingly that you ask, I'm currently reviewing the Northern Passes proposal to do such a thing across 192 miles of my home state, and actively engaged in estimating the wildlife impacts of something that is, of course, much larger. It is definitely going to have an impact. There'll be some, as I say, gainers and losers. The more sensitive species you will lose, they'll be deterred, and some of the less sensitive and more tolerant species of open areas will be encouraged. One thing I did not mention was that there are some habitats out there that are very favorable for a number of rare species that we yet have not identified on that site. And so again, I think that the wisest course of action is to determine what's out there first and then move ahead with a plan. But I thank you for your question.
Jill Seaman, 50 Center Street. We've already heard that the Hunt Club uses this area. What are the impacts that they've been already using it, and how's that in fact affected the wildlife there? And also, we've heard a lot about dogs and horses and animals, and I just want to say I like to think about children and families and a healthy lifestyle.
Thank you for your question. There's no question that horses have an impact on wildlife populations as well. It tends not to be as dramatic as an irregular and variable activity that would result from, say, pedestrians on a rail trail. And I mention that because, of course, to me, I had to ask the question, well, we had a railroad there with trains going by on a regular basis for a long period of time. Wasn't that a hugely fragmenting effect? And it was. The difference, however, is that something like that provides, as horses do, a very understandable and adaptable behavior by the species that are observing those types of actions. In other words, a train comes by and it passes. The train comes by and passes maybe once a day, twice a day. Wildlife species will adapt to those types of stimuli in a predictable way. After a while, that behavior goes extinct and they adapt. What they can adapt to is the variable nature of bikes at different times, or walkers at different times, different noises from people, dogs running perhaps on leash or off leash. That isn't a predictable or consistent behavior that would provide for the same type of adaptation ability. So that's as best as I can do, but absolutely, in terms of horses, there is some impact.
We're going to recognize John Cohn from the committee.
Hi, John Cohn,
Yes.
Draper Road, Warrant Committee. Just a little bit of a follow-up, and we had a gentleman from the Hunt Club talking about regularly, and I don't know the exact schedule, but I assume this was weekly or more, 40 or 45 hounds being run up and down this trail, and that's not, it just strikes me that we currently are in a situation where it's not exactly a pristine line, and it seems to me that a group of hounds that are, that operate basically by scent and so on might have a bit of a disturbing effect on the area right now that might kind of overwhelm somebody walking along a trail. I'm not, but that's just what we,
I think that's a very reasonable, John. Completely understandable. I would tend to agree. I think the only point that I would make in response to that is, at least when I was out there, I observed that there were a lot of trailless areas in this 800 acres where that activity doesn't take place. And some of those areas, particularly that rock ridge that comes up Snow Hill and crosses over just south and east of Channing Pond, devoid of trails of any type. A number of wetlands in there as well. So that's, what I would call sort of the core habitat area that would be more impacted than, say, south of there near Hunt Drive where the trails are more frequent.
Wendy Mullers, 30 Brookfield Road. You mentioned Susan Morse. Is that keeping track?
Yes.
So you're part of that organization?
I'm not a part of that organization. I've worked with Susan on a number of different projects.
So say the town did pay for the service to get the wildlife
Study,
survey
yeah.
done, and you found Jefferson salamanders or blue-spotted salamanders. What does that give the town in terms of information? Does that mean that if Eversource wanted to lease that property, that they would not be able to do what they wanted to do? Is that the protection that gives the land?
I believe if there was any listed species that the state recognizes and were found there, then absolutely there would be an impact on whatever construction would take place, whether it was Eversource or the rail trail. Yeah.
Mark Ely, Meeting House Hill Road. So I wonder, given that, is this kind of like testing your home for lead, and now that you know, you are bound by certain things? Because I did hear George say the dogs are taken out, sounds like every day, going left and right. They're not house dogs. Would we then have to restrict the hound dogs from using the trail network because of the blue-spotted salamander?
Not being a representative of the state, I can't say yes or no, but if it was up to me, absolutely.
That would be your recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the species that is there. For example, I mentioned blue-spotted salamanders as one, but that's a very different species than the eastern box turtle, which also occurs in Dover, and it's one of the listed species for the town. Very different type of deterrent sort of recommendations as a result of finding both of those types of species. So, yeah, different depending on what you find. That's my answer, yeah.
But guidelines that we have for Eversource would have to be the same for Hunt Club, or I'm not understanding. Would it be the same?
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is that if I find something that would be a sensitive species that the state recognizes, then whoever is using the area within their habitat would need to concur with the guidelines and the recommendations of the state. Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely.
Actually, there's one more and then you, Jerry.
Valerie Lynn, 14 Haven Terrace. I believe Susan Morse was involved in the Weston Rail Trail.
Yes.
And I believe there were probably some species found, because there's very sensitive areas, and DCR came in actually and took over that lease and is now paving a rail trail through Weston. So I'm not quite sure that if you find a species of some sort that may or may not be protected, that DCR still couldn't come in and do whatever they feel is appropriate for that space, given that what they've done in Weston. I'm just talking about the experience that Weston has had.
I apologize for not having as much experience with DCR, but I know in our state, if that were to take place, there'd be a significant outcry from a number of different parties to prevent it.
Sure. Another comment I have is the same master plan, the 2012 master plan, also talks about expanding recreational opportunities. So while it does talk about identifying and doing a wildlife study, it has listed in multiple places throughout the plan to study proposals to convert the rail bed into a hiking and biking trail, to coordinate recreational opportunities between various organizations. It also talks about developing expanded parking opportunities to open spaces by changing bylaws. As well as it also talks about, for the Board of Health, reducing tick bites. And one of the ways that a rail trail is beneficial for helping to reduce tick bites is it doesn't have the canopy and the overhang that the trails that we currently have in Dover have. And so it doesn't create the habitat of where ticks live. And a couple studies that I looked up, one recently says that Massachusetts has been identified as one of the states that has the highest population of ticks. And in fact, in Dover, we are one of the communities in the state who have one of the highest tick bite rates. I believe 268 tick bites per 100,000 people, which is one of the highest in our state. So I think this is a real consideration for us to be thinking about as we decide what's going to happen to this corridor. And recently there was also a radio program that talked about here in Massachusetts on the Cape, that there was a gentleman who's 21 years old who was bitten by a tick. And what they're finding is that ticks not only have Lyme's disease, but have an increased rate of diseases that they thought had kind of gone away that are now coming back, and have very high mortality rates. This gentleman who's 21 ended up with encephalitis and was hospitalized for a long time. So I think these are all factors that we need to take into consideration when considering what we're going to do with this corridor.
Right.
Thank you.
One and then two.
Terry Clark, Board of Health. I was going to only ask two very quick questions, but I don't have to respond from the Lyme Disease Committee. All I can say to that is, yes, Massachusetts is in fact currently rated up the top. Dover is one of the top towns. That is true. And if you have interest, please come to a Lyme Disease Committee meeting. They're regularly scheduled in the calendar and the materials on the website. My questions are actually to council and by way to the Warrant Committee, but really to the citizen who proposed this, to the town council. If Article 19 passes and the town proceeds, would not the town as the actor and the executor of the lease be obligated to do an environmental impact study, which might indeed incorporate exactly this? Question one. Question two to the Warrant Committee, and it's not, I know you don't have the answer, but I've not seen the financial number for this article, and is that not the obligation of the petitioner?
Well, I can answer number two, which is the Warrant Committee was informed that there was a approximate cost of $15,700.
And are they not obligated also to explain
I believe there would be asking for the town to pay for the study. That's the article's written.
According to Beals, the answer to the question is no. There would not be an environmental impact study required because none of the thresholds are triggered.
Ralph Schlenker, 30 Donnelly Drive. Madam Chair, in your opening comments, you indicated a 2-minute time limit and you request respectability.
Correct.
We just exceeded a couple of these presentations of more than 2 minutes. I don't think that's fair, number one. Number two, Mr. Moss's comment about the Friends of the Be True to Dover group being environmental, I think is a little bit out of order.
Noted. Thank you.
This is a question for the legal counsel, actually. The two options that were given to us so far is either build a rail trail or potentially leave an option for somebody else to come in and build a rail trail as a possibility. Is it a possibility, since this is not a rail banking situation, that we could request a lease and use it as a conservation land and prevent further development?
No, that's not a realistic opportunity with the MBTA. They preserve the corridor for transportation purposes. If you turn it into a conservation corridor, it can be covered with Article 97 protections and become unavailable to the team for future transportation. So I do not see that as a realistic option.
Given that we have four more articles, we're going to take one last question.
Andres Rapella, Haven Terrace. Just a question for Mr. Vanderpool. We've heard a lot about the ticks situation, town meeting last year, once again tonight, and I'm just interested in hearing from your professional opinion in terms of the presence of ticks. My daughter has had Lyme disease twice. My mother has had Lyme disease, and I can assure you none of them are in the woods. They've always been on their back lawn, in their backyard. I'm in the woods daily. I've never had Lyme disease. So I'm just curious about where do we find ticks? Could you speak to how a trail might be different than, say, your backyard?
Certainly, Andres. Thank you for the question. Just full disclosure, I've had Lyme disease for 5 years, and I probably know more about it than most people in this room. I am outdoors a lot. I'm constantly on the watch. Where I live in New Hampshire, Carroll County is the second highest incidence of Lyme disease in the state, in a state that is the highest incidence in the country. Lyme ticks, that is to say black-legged ticks that tend to carry Lyme disease and associated co-infections, of which there are many of which we don't know, occur mostly in open and fragmented habitats. Their populations peak in roadside edges, trailside edges, open fields, especially old fields. Deer are one of the moving vectors for that, for the tick. The Peromyscus white-footed and deer mice are probably equally as important as deer, and both of those are fragmentation species. So any fragmenting effects, whether it's a roadway, a rail corridor, or a power line, will increase the incidence of Lyme-carrying ticks. It's just absolutely straight fact. You can look at the number of studies, particularly out of the Carey Institute, that has looked at the correlation between fragmentation and the occurrence of black-legged ticks that carry those diseases. Okay.
Thank you. We'll now move on to Article 22, pay-as-you-throw for solid waste.
Hi, Chris Paulson, Dover Recycling Committee Chairman. Mr. Hughes, Craig, maybe you can come up so we can make this relatively quick. Craig Hughes is going to join me, as well as Kathy Mercer from DEP. I would also like to thank Carol Lisbon and Janet Greenwood and the other members of the Recycling Committee that have participated in what constitutes a 4-year effort. And as well, we just lost our Dover Sherburne senior, who probably left to go to bed to get up early for school. But we had 14 interns from the Dover Sherburne school system that participated in the work behind this study over the last 4 years. And so, lastly, I just would ask you all to please excuse my cap. For the very first time, I went to a dermatologist on Friday, and with a very nice smile and a can of frozen nitrogen, she spotted my head. And I got home and looked in the mirror, and I looked like a Christmas tree. I couldn't believe it. So I thought you'd have enough intimidation this evening. So I'll wear this cap. Okay, so first slide. Here really are the numbers, Bill, next slide, and why we're here tonight. I would say that there were 50 copies of this presentation at the back. I noticed just now that there's only 1 or 2 left, so I think many of them are distributed. And there's all kinds of backup slides in the appendix of that we tried to provide. There's lots of data, and also on the town homepage, there's a link to an even more detailed set of information. And so what you don't see in this particular set, but the numbers are there in the appendix, is that Dover has really been flatlined since 2009 at about 2,100 pounds of solid waste per household. So we've made some progress since we started tracking this in 2003. And as of about 2009, we just have been flat with it. And the Recycling Committee, in conjunction with the transfer station operations, have tried everything under the sun to make some progress in that, because Dover is basically roughly double the amount of trash per household as communities, the other communities in the state. And so that's really why we've been pressing on this. And so again, starting back 4 years, we've been looking at what are best practices for reducing solid waste. We've gone and interviewed about 12 communities: Wellesley, Medfield, Needham, and a whole bunch of other communities. And we've tried everything under the sun with our current system to have some impact on the amount of solid waste and recycling that the town produces. So here are the hard numbers. In 2014, up on the top left there, Dover was ranked 226th out of 240 communities in the state of Massachusetts that reported their solid waste and recycling numbers. In 2015, in the top right there, we were even worse, just out of the bottom 5%, ranked at 238th out of 253 communities. A couple things I want to point out. If you look at the communities that we've listed there, it's not correlated to affluence. There's very affluent communities that are ranked significantly better. and there's many less affluent communities than, say, Dover, that we're ranked with. Bottom portion of that top right corner, there's some notable comparisons. We just tried to pick out similar communities with transfer stations that happen to have pay-as-you-throw, and you can kind of see they're ranked significantly better than Dover. The bottom graph here is kind of taking all the data from DEP, the macro picture, and there's kind of two ribbons on this just to bear out. The blue ribbon is kind of like a distribution by category, the percentages of towns in each category. You may not be able to see it, but it's towns between 750 and 1,000 pounds per household. The next category is 1,000 to 1,200 pounds, and it's a percentage of towns in each category. And so the blue ribbon are the towns that have pay-as-you-throw programs. That's the percentages of towns way over in the right in the lower categories of weight. The red ribbon are the towns that don't have any pay-as-you-throw, and their distribution of where their households are performing by weight in a year. And so the mean, the average of towns with pay-as-you-throw is about 1,100 pounds per household. That's the mean. The mean of the towns without pay-as-you-throw programs are at about 2,100 pounds per household, or sorry, 1,700 pounds per household. So it's a 37% higher. And Dover is way out there on the right. We have it listed out there. We're way out there in that just above the bottom 5% at 2,134 pounds per household. Next slide, please, Bill. If the data doesn't convince you, and by the way, in the appendix, there's lots of data on all the other towns that have done pay-as-you-throw, and Kathy will speak to you more about pay-as-you-throw. If the data doesn't convince you, perhaps a picture will. As one of we had the Warrant Committee out on Friday. We had some select persons members present, and there were several. These are pictures just from emptying out the trash compactor onto the ground. And you can see lots and lots of books and papers and foils and plastics and textiles. And overall, I believe the estimate was about 20 to 30% of the goods in our trash were recyclable. And many of us were astonished. And I think there's several takeaways that we kind of had. One is that many of the perspectives that people have is their own perspective, their own practices. They're familiar with how much they recycle. They go to the transfer station, and Craig has one heck of a neat and clean operation. They see a flurry of people out there doing all kinds of recycling, and at best, they're hovering over that little smelly, empty trash receptacle for 1 minute, and then they got to move on because there's someone behind them. So people come to this problem with their own perspective, and they say, Dover, we recycle so well. There's no way we can get 20 to 30% additional solid waste reduction by instituting pay-as-you-throw. But that's the picture. That's the reality, despite your perceptions. So that's the picture. I guess I had failed to mention it, but in the appendix, there's a slide, I think it's 13 or 14, where it goes through all of what we've looked at. We've looked at single stream, we've looked at, and we've been out at Wellesley, and we've copied many of their initiatives. We've introduced book recycling, textile recycling, plastics recycling. We've consolidated the plastics. We've got special recycle days that deal with mattresses and tires. We're instituting furniture recycling this summer, and rigid plastics recycling, and some of the construction demolition. There's all kinds of diversion opportunities that we put in place. And Mass DEP and U.S. EPA far and away advise the best practice, the 21st century practice, is to institute a program where the economics kind of incent people to be conscious and mindful of the trash that they're giving away. And the next slide really conveys the basic problem, and that is that we all love simplicity, convenience, and free. The problem is that is often wasteful. And so
all of the DEP and EPA data suggests that you really have to introduce some financial skin in the game to influence the behavior of residents. And the Dover trash model today is that property taxes are paying for all the transfer station services, which are relatively less visible. There were no questions about it today in the Article 4 budget. In fact, there was zero capital request in the Article 4 budget. So it's very invisible, that cost. And then to the resident, there's no user fees, basically. It's free throw down there at the transfer station. The implications is that there's no impact to the resident or cost if he brings 1 bag a week or 50 bags a week. There's no impact or cost to a resident if he or she recycles 1% or 50%. And the conjecture is, if you recall that picture that I showed you, there's many residents that are not recycling at all. So many people here may have this perspective, this is how I recycle, they see such a clean operation, everybody must recycle that. The picture is showing you, and the data is showing you, the amount of solid waste per household, our recyclables are low. We're not in the league that we can and we should be. So the outcome is that we have high solid waste rates and low recycling rates. So with that, we've looked at all sorts of alternatives and for the past 4 years, and this really is what we've concluded. We've interviewed towns, what we really believe to be the right way forward. Kathy, would you speak to Paige, please? It's Kathy Mercer from Mass Department of Environmental Protection.
Yes, hi, thank you very much. As Chris had mentioned, DEP certainly supports these type of programs. And just to give you a little bit of background for me very briefly, I've got one slide and I'll keep it rather concise at this late hour. But what I do is I'm a regional municipal assistance coordinator for the Mass Department of Environmental Protection. I serve a district of 44 cities and towns west and south of Boston. And my job is to help with technical assistance and grant coordination for these communities that are trying to reduce waste, recycle more, compost more, and the like. And of my 44 communities in my district, 23 of them have a pay-as-you-throw type of program, which I'll describe briefly in just a moment. I will say that it's been a great opportunity in the past couple of years to work with Dover on this, to dive in very deep with members of the Recycling Committee and also with Craig Hughes, to really look at your current operation and then think about what other programs are out there that you could learn from to help you really enhance the performance of your program here, because clearly the program has been stated when Chris mentioned the amount of trash generated per household is much, much higher in Dover than it is in many other communities in the state. So I've been so impressed by the due diligence this group has done, the level of research over the past couple of years, the site visits to other communities, to talk with peers, to talk with other transfer station operators with pay-as-you-throw, to hear about what's working, what are the challenges, what would we need to know, what would Dover need to know if they were to bring this back to their community. And so with that, I think the team just made a very honest reflection about what were the best opportunities out there for the community. And we know that in terms of the environmental impact and from a cost savings perspective, that reducing your trash is the single best thing to work on. And from DEP's perspective and also the EPA's perspective, a pay-as-you-throw program is the mechanism that's going to help you reduce your trash to the greatest extent. Because we have data from 145 communities in Massachusetts that have it and thousands of communities across the country, these programs are very proven over many, many years. Next slide, please. I should have had you forward. But just to briefly describe what pay-as-you-throw is, it might be self-evident from the name, but another acronym for it is a smart or save money and reduce trash type of program. Basic idea is that residents would pay for the amount of trash that they generate and dispose of. It would work very much like a utility. So a household uses more water or more electricity, they would pay more for that service that they're using. It provides a great incentive to use less, to recycle more, to compost, to donate items that are still in good usable condition, to perhaps even think differently when we shop, so that we're not buying products or packaging that are really excessive. So these programs really help to not only reduce tipping fees because you're reducing the amount of trash generated, but you're also saving on transportation costs from your facility to the incinerator where your waste is delivered. You're also reducing maintenance costs for your fleet. and other machinery that you're using at the transfer station for the compactors. It gives you, the residents, much more control over the waste you generate and the program costs. As I mentioned, you generate a small amount of trash, it would be a very low cost for this type of program. And also, you know, we see very commonly that the amount of waste reduction in these communities is between 20 and 50% on average. It really depends on your starting point, but honestly, there's so much room for improvement in terms of your waste reduction here in Dover. I would expect that you would have a very substantial amount of reduction in your solid waste should you go forward with this program. They are smart programs, they're market-driven, they're market-based, so you have control. And Craig is going to just take a couple of moments to describe the specific proposal for pay-as-you-throw that Dover is being asked to consider. So thank you.
Okay, I'll only keep you another half an hour or so, but I just want to reinforce what the committee and Chris and, I'm Craig Hughes, by the way, Chris and Kathy have just want to reinforce that. I want to thank the Warrant Committee, the Selectmen, for letting us put this on the warrant, for at least for consideration by the townspeople. I'll just briefly step into the bags and then I'll finish up with my spiel I did at the open forum the best I can, but I won't keep it too long. But we looked at all the options, and at a minimal cost, this is what we've come up with. You know, the 50 cents for the bags, $1 for bags, 2 different size bags. We've left the bulky items alone. We haven't changed the existing, you know, recycling program. We're actually adding a few more things come the summertime that the committee's worked hard to get some gifts and grants for. That will certainly help. But I'm not going to dwell on the bags. These are the size bags here if anybody wants to, you know, take a look or feel them. But one's a larger bag and one's a smaller bag. A lot of communities use this as a money-making effort. This isn't what this is all about. This is to really get more out of the trash. I think we can do, and you can do the next slide, Bill. That'd be great. I think we can do so much better. It's my job, and the committee's really woken me up about this over the last 2.5 years since we studied this, because I wasn't a believer until I saw it at different towns and so forth, and how it can work with minimal impact, but yet you can save the town a lot of money, the environment, and so forth. But you know, if we can reduce, and I think we can reduce an additional, you know, 20 to 30%, if not more. The people that do recycle right now in town, they do a heck of a job, I'll tell you, because I can't understand the numbers sometimes, and I watch how many people do a great job, and you know, kudos to you people that do that. But when I see that 238 number out of 253 towns, that really hurts. And I'll say it again, because we've always, you know, prided ourselves, this town, on being number one in schools, infrastructure, finance, everything. And that's a lousy number to be, and especially some of the towns that are below us and are our neighbors. That doesn't sit well with me. But I think we can do a lot better. You know, you see the savings right there, but there are hidden costs to the vehicle costs, less trips that we'd be doing. You know, we can allocate a little more with the labor that we would save on the hours, probably helping you people learn how to pay as you throw up there. I could certainly, you know, make that work. But I see the net, you know, the net benefit here, at least on the budget, I'm going to say $25,000 to $30,000 a year, and then the, you know, the bags themselves. But this is only a win-win, and we're only asking to try it. You know, give us a chance. And if it doesn't work, I'll be the first one to come back and tell you all again. That's not working. We have to look at something else. But I think there is a little room that we can work on this, and I'm just asking you for your support. And I'll leave it at that and open it up to any questions.
Not quite ready for questions yet. We got 2 slides to close up. Yep. Okay, thanks, Greg. Okay. Next slide, Bill. So just to close it up, we had some questions at the public forum a couple weeks ago there, and so just to try to address those, I wanted to make sure that if the town was to be supportive of this proposal on the 1st of May, basically we have 3 months, May through July, to work with, there's 4 vendors that offer these kinds of bags and programs that are sanctioned by the state. We've got June through August, again, another 3 months for education and awareness, videos on the town sites, how-to information sessions. We're going to have committee members at the transfer station. There's even a 1-800 number that one of the vendors offers if they were selected to provide information on it. In August, the bags would be available in the stores, and we would have kind of a 3-month implementation aiming to achieve full compliance in the 3rd month. Just in case it wasn't clear from Craig, we have tried so hard. We went around at all the different ways these programs have been implemented, and the only thing that we've chosen is the absolute bare minimum, is the bags. It's really what we thought would be the least invasive, the smallest change, yet still have the potential to introduce that economic result. So in summary, pay-as-you-throw, as Kathy mentioned, is very well documented, and it's a proven best practice. She mentioned, and I just want to underline it, that all the towns that have done it, and it's in a slide in your appendix, the savings have ranged 20 to 50%. Some of the towns in there are 70%, but the official numbers are 20 to 50% the savings. We've looked at all forms of alternatives, and this really did seem to be the biggest bang for the buck. It's actually zero cost to the town. It should result in $25,000 savings and an additional $40,000 to $50,000 in revenue to the town, to the cash general fund. It wasn't mentioned, and just to be clear, unless it is on here, okay, number 3. I did mention that this was the minimum proposal we could devise, and in fact, it translates into less than $1 a week per household. That's the estimate, the incremental cost, less than $1 a week per household. It makes no changes to the current private commercial hauler pickup arrangements, no changes to the current recycling procedures. It should reduce the budgets, as we talked about, and bring in some bag revenue. And it should reduce, finally, our solid waste. 20 to 30% is what we're estimating. That translates into a 20 to 30% reduction in greenhouse gases and CO2. And this proposal is unanimously supported by the Recycling Committee, the Board of Health, the Superintendent of Streets, who you heard fall on his sword, and we hope by the Warrant Committee before the time of the town meeting. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Connie Egan's Greystone Road. I understand, but I don't know for a fact, that open access to the transfer station is no longer available to the commercial truckers.
That's correct.
As of January 1.
As of January 1, that's correct. Yep.
So has there been any noticeable reduction in the amount of trash in the last 3 months?
Craig can speak to it authoritatively. I'm familiar with the numbers. They have reduced a corresponding amount that we were anticipating for 560 households that were serviced by commercial hauling in the town of
But what we
Dover.
didn't know with the unlimited access to the dump is whether everybody's trash was from Dover.
No, so we've seen what looks like a corresponding reduction that we would be expecting for about 25.
So there's been tonnage drop in 3 months?
Yes, about 25 to 30%.
January about 56 tons, Bonnie, and just this past February was down 76 tons.
That's 132 tons in 2 months.
Yep.
So do you think it's worth waiting a year to see what happens for a year before you do this? Because that's got to have been a huge trash stream.
Yeah, so the commercial haulers, we have the amount of trash that they contributed, and we have the number of households that they contribute. And no surprise, it's the same amount of trash per household as the transfer station receives by people from the backs of their cars. And so by taking that trash out of the transfer station, it doesn't change the statistic of pounds per household. It stays the same.
But it changes the number of pounds at the transfer.
Yes, but we also lost the same number of people, users of the transfer station, because that trash is no longer there.
And it's not coming back.
Right. So the numerator and the calculation went down by the amount of trash that the commercial haulers did, but the denominator lost the people, the households as well. So it doesn't change. Yes, sir.
Bob Bennett, 15 Wading Road. My understanding is a lot of people who have moved out of Dover or have been able to get a hold of a sticker, a dump sticker, even though they don't live in Dover anymore, they still have access to the dump. Is there any program that's been initiated to check stickers to make sure that they're still legitimate?
That's work in progress, Bob. Yes, we're aware of that, and yes, I'll leave it at that.
This should actually disincent them from using the transfer station because now they'll need pretty purple bags to use it. Any other questions?
Tracy Bamey, Tisdale Drive. Chris, are there 2,000 households total in Dover or 2,000 households using the transfer station?
There's about 2,000 households total. Where may know the census you gave me it actually. I think it might be 2008 is as of the 17 census.
That's the number I saw. And then there's 500 and some odd who are using private haulers.
The private haulers reported to us 560 customers, which as of the 1st of January are no longer contributing trash from the commercial haulers to the transfer station. So the estimate is that there's about 1,400 active users of the transfer station, contributing about 1 ton or 2,100 pounds of trash per household.
And so what we saw from the statistics is that each household is contributing about 1,000 pounds more trash than the average household in a pay-as-you-throw town. So if we look at those 1,500 or 1,400 households at 1,000 pounds per household, that means we're sending 1,400,000 pounds of trash extra to the incinerator per year, contributing to greenhouse gases and all kinds of other pollution issues. So I think that even if there are a few people coming in who have old stickers, and we have some people who have pulled their trash out, the private haulers have pulled the trash out, that we as the town of Dover really have a lot of work to do. And that I don't think that we should be focused on whether we have a few extra pounds when we're talking about 1,000 pounds per family or almost 1.5 million pounds as a town, that we can all
30 seconds.
afford to spend the $34 to $44 a year that you've estimated in order to help gravely or drastically, positively reduce the amount of trash that we're creating and sending away.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
We'll now move on to Article 23. Blue Wave Solar Array Pilot Program. Oh, and Articles 24 and 25 will be heard at the same time. Those articles are net metering agreement and access to landfill on Hale Reservation.
So these three articles are directly related to the Blue Wave Solar Array at the transfer station. The first article is the pilot program, and that is, we can go to the next slide, that is Article 24. It's a payment in lieu of taxes. As I mentioned, it's in connection with the solar array. The solar array is subject to personal property tax, not dissimilar from excise tax that we pay on a car. That tax is typically front-end loaded. The pilot program spreads the tax payment over the life of the solar array, and it's also a pre-negotiated price. The Board of Selectmen, the assessors, and our council worked on negotiating this agreement.
It's about $28,000 a year overall.
Thank you, Bonnie. The next item is 25, and Article 25 came to our attention as we were negotiating the Blue Wave Solar Array. It was quite a complex negotiation, and one of the aspects of it was a net metering agreement, which at the end of the day was going to save the town of Dover approximately $20,000 a year on utility costs over the next 20 years. And when it came down to the wire, we realized that Blue Wave had to have the agreement executed in order to qualify for the financing, and the town of Dover needed town meeting's approval for a 20-year contract. So, because I don't like leaving money on the table, I figured out our alternative was to find someone else, and the region was actually able to enter into this agreement for us. And by having the region enter into the agreement, we were able to save the $20,000 a year, but splitting it with Sherborne. There are many net metering arrangements available, and at some point in time, it may be beneficial for us to look at alternative programs. And we found that numerous other towns have a bylaw in place which allows the Board of Selectmen or the mayor to enter into a utility contract for 20 years. So what we're asking for here is the ability for the Board of Selectmen, if another such opportunity comes up, to allow us to authorize us to enter into potentially a utility agreement. And then Article 25 is, as we began to negotiate the solar array, it came to our attention that for 40 years we've been monitoring the landfill without any formal agreement with Hale Reservation. So this allows us to document our agreement with Hale Reservation, which is crucial because we need to be able to monitor the landfill. So it's just housekeeping. And that's it. Any questions? There you go.
Okay, seeing that there are no questions, we will see you on May 1st at town meeting. Oh, I'm sorry.
Bonnie Akins, Greystone Road. I believe the instructions at the beginning were not, there were not any comments or questions, but I would like to make a comment about Mr. Snyder's presentation about free cash. I appreciate...
Mr. Stewart.
Oh, Mr. Stewart, I'm sorry. Forgive me. It's only been a little while since you spoke. I appreciate that presentation very much. I can tell you that I am absolutely positive that over $8 million is the highest that free cash has ever been in the life of the town. It is even greater than the whole budget was when I was the chairman of the Warrant Committee, when it was about $7 million something. I applaud that you're using more free cash at the moment than you did last year. I would ask you to consider using a little bit more. The town is guided by the state with a 3 to 5% number. I know the bond rating agencies have told you that it's got to be a whole lot higher than that. But if you add $830,000 to $8,130,000, you have an awful lot of capital behind you. And it's a little more than I think you should have. I think 10% would be just fine with me. If you saw a big number coming up next year, maybe a little more. But $9 million is too much cash in the bank.
Thank you for those comments. The Warrant Committee is evaluating the options and our free cash standing and the road that we traveled to get to this point. And we've discussed this at the prior two meetings, and we'll be discussing it at several more prior to making a recommendation at town meeting. Thank you. So on that note, town meeting is at 7 o'clock on Monday, May 1st, and this meeting is adjourned.